For most of human history, survival did not depend on comfort. It depended on endurance. Bodies were shaped not to last gently, but to keep going under strain, cold, hunger, and long movement across uncertain land. And yet, in the present, with fewer immediate threats, the body seems to wear down more quickly, not less. Muscles tire sooner, recovery slows, and small discomforts linger longer than they once needed to. It is not that the human body became weaker in a simple sense, but that it was built for a different rhythm than the one it now follows, a rhythm where rest, effort, and environment were never separated. So what happens when that rhythm disappears, but the body remains the same? And why do humans seem to wear out faster than other animals? The feeling often arrives quietly, without a clear reason, a kind of tiredness that seems out of proportion to the effort that came before it. You wake up, move through a small part of the day, and already there is a sense that something is being used up too quickly. The body feels as if it is running on a limited reserve, even when the demands placed on it are not extreme. This experience is familiar to many people, across different environments and lifestyles, and it raises a simple but persistent question about how the human body manages energy over time. From a biological perspective, fatigue is not a failure, it is a signal. It reflects the interaction between muscles, the nervous system, and the availability of metabolic resources such as glucose and oxygen. When these systems detect imbalance or sustained demand, they create the sensation we recognize as tiredness. This process is well documented in physiology, and it is not unique to humans. All animals experience forms of fatigue, yet the way this feeling appears in human daily life can seem unusually early, sometimes detached from intense physical exertion. To understand this, it is useful to consider how the human body developed its patterns of energy use over long periods of time. In earlier environments, human movement was often spread across many hours in a low-intensity form. Walking, carrying, adjusting posture, and interacting with uneven ground were part of a continuous flow rather than isolated activities. These patterns are supported by skeletal and muscular structures that favor endurance at moderate levels rather than short bursts of maximum output. The heart, lungs, and muscles are coordinated to sustain ongoing activity, with gradual shifts in effort rather than abrupt changes. When activity is distributed in this way, the signals of fatigue tend to emerge more slowly because no single system is pushed to its limit in a short period. In contrast, when movement becomes more limited and concentrated into shorter periods, the body may respond differently. Extended periods of stillness, followed by sudden activity, can create sharper transitions in energy demand. The cardiovascular system must adjust quickly. Muscles are recruited more abruptly, and the nervous system interprets these shifts as higher strain. Even if the total amount of work is not large, the pattern of how it is performed influences how fatigue is perceived. This does not mean that modern patterns are incorrect, but it highlights a difference between continuous and segmented activity. Another aspect to consider is the role of the brain in regulating effort. Human fatigue is not determined only by the muscles. The brain continuously evaluates signals from the body and can limit performance to protect overall stability. This regulatory process is sometimes described in scientific literature as a protective mechanism, ensuring that the body does not exceed safe limits. Because of this, the sensation of tiredness can appear before physical resources are fully depleted. It is a cautious system, shaped by long-term survival rather than immediate efficiency. In daily life, where physical threats are less direct, this protective signaling can feel premature, even though it follows consistent biological principles. Looking further back, the human lineage developed under conditions where energy had to be carefully managed. Food availability could vary, and physical effort was often tied to essential tasks such as gathering or traveling. Under these circumstances, the body benefited from signaling fatigue early enough to prevent overuse, while still allowing sustained activity when needed. This balance between conservation and endurance remains part of human physiology today. It does not switch off when the environment changes. Instead, it continues to operate in the background, influencing how energy is used and how fatigue is felt. When these elements are viewed together, the experience of feeling tired too early becomes less mysterious. It reflects the interaction between continuous biological systems and patterns of activity that may differ from those in which these systems developed. The body is not simply running out of energy in a straightforward way. It is responding to how energy is requested, distributed, and regulated across time. This response can feel disproportionate, but it follows internal logic that has been shaped over long periods of human development. And within that quiet signal of early fatigue, there is a deeper question about whether the sensation itself is pointing to a mismatch between the body's original rhythms and the way those rhythms are now being used. The sense of early fatigue does not come only from how much energy is used, but also from how the body interprets that use in relation to its internal expectations. These expectations are not conscious. They are embedded in regulatory systems that have been shaped over long periods of human development, where patterns of effort were rarely isolated or abrupt. Instead of short, intense demands followed by long periods of stillness, the body was more often engaged in sequences of low to moderate activity that changed gradually over time. This distinction matters because the human system does not measure effort in simple totals. It responds to patterns, transitions, and consistency. When activity is uneven, the signals that emerge can feel stronger, even if the total work is not especially high. In physiology, fatigue is influenced by multiple systems working together. Muscles rely on a steady supply of energy substrates, primarily glucose and fatty acids, and their performance depends on efficient circulation and oxygen delivery. The nervous system monitors this process and adjusts motor output based on feedback. When signals indicate that conditions are changing quickly, such as a sudden increase in effort after inactivity, the response may include an earlier sense of strain. This is not necessarily a sign that the body is failing. It reflects the sensitivity of systems that are designed to maintain stability across varying conditions. The body tends to favor gradual adaptation over abrupt change, and when that preference is not met, the sensation of fatigue can appear sooner than expected. This pattern becomes clearer when considering how humans have historically interacted with their environment. Movement was often integrated into daily survival, not separated into distinct periods. Walking long distances, adjusting to terrain, carrying objects, and maintaining balance on uneven ground all required ongoing engagement of multiple muscle groups at low intensity. These activities supported circulation, joint mobility, and energy distribution in a continuous way. Because no single system was isolated or overloaded quickly, fatigue developed more gradually, allowing individuals to maintain activity over extended periods. Archaeological and anthropological research suggests that such patterns of movement were common across different human populations, even though the exact details varied depending on environment and resources. The key point is not the specific activity, but the continuity of movement and the absence of long interruptions. In contrast, when the body remains still for extended periods, several processes begin to change. Circulation becomes less dynamic, muscle activation decreases, and the nervous system shifts toward a different state of regulation. When movement resumes, especially if it requires immediate coordination or effort, the transition can feel disproportionate. The body is required to move from a low-activity state to a higher one, without the gradual build-up it tends to handle more efficiently. This can contribute to the perception that energy is being used too quickly, even though the overall demand may not be unusual. Over time, repeated exposure to this pattern can reinforce the sensation, as the body becomes accustomed to sharp contrasts between stillness and activity. Another factor is the role of perception itself. Fatigue is not only a physical state but also an experience shaped by how the brain integrates internal signals. The brain does not wait for complete depletion before generating the feeling of tiredness. It acts earlier, using available information to maintain a margin of safety. This means that the sensation of being tired can emerge while there is still capacity for continued effort. In environments where physical demands were closely tied to survival, this early signaling may have helped prevent injury or exhaustion. In modern settings, where physical effort is often optional or intermittent, the same mechanism can feel less aligned with immediate needs. The result is a sense that the body is stopping too soon, even though it is following consistent regulatory principles. When viewed in this way, early fatigue becomes a reflection of how the body manages change rather than a simple measure of how much energy is available. It highlights the importance of continuity, gradual transitions, and stable patterns of use. These elements were present throughout much of human development and remain embedded in the way the body operates today. As the pattern of daily life shifts away from these conditions, the signals that guide energy use do not disappear. They continue to respond according to their original design, creating an experience that can feel unfamiliar or unexpected in the present context. This raises a quiet possibility that the timing of fatigue is not only about how much is being done, but about how closely the pattern of activity aligns with the conditions under which the human body first learned to endure. Even when the body appears to have enough energy, the feeling of fatigue can still arrive, and this often leads to the assumption that something has been lost or diminished. Yet from a biological point of view, the presence of fatigue does not always reflect a shortage of fuel. It often reflects a decision made by the body about how that fuel should be used. This decision is shaped by systems that prioritize stability, not maximum output. The body does not aim to use all available energy as quickly as possible. It aims to preserve function across time, even when immediate demands seem low. Because of this, the sensation of being tired can appear in situations where the body is choosing caution over efficiency. This becomes more visible when considering how energy is stored and released. Human metabolism is capable of shifting between different sources of energy, including carbohydrates and fats, depending on the intensity and duration of activity. These processes are flexible, but they are not instantaneous. They rely on gradual transitions that allow enzymes, hormones, and circulation to adjust in a coordinated way. When activity patterns support these transitions, energy use can feel steady and sustainable. When patterns are irregular, the coordination between these systems can become less smooth, and the resulting sensation may be interpreted as fatigue. This does not mean that the systems are failing. It suggests that they are responding to conditions that differ from the ones they are most adapted to handle. Looking back across human development, there is consistent evidence that energy use was closely tied to necessity. Movement, effort, and rest were not separate categories but parts of a continuous process shaped by environment and availability of resources. Food intake was variable, and the body developed mechanisms to manage both scarcity and abundance. These mechanisms include the ability to conserve energy when needed and to sustain activity when resources are uncertain. Such flexibility is a central feature of human physiology, and it remains present today. However, when energy is used in ways that are not directly linked to survival tasks, the internal signals that guide effort may not align with external expectations. The body continues to regulate itself according to principles that were established over long periods, even when the context has changed. Another important element is the interaction between physical and mental effort. In humans, the brain represents a significant portion of total energy use, and cognitive activity can influence how physical fatigue is experienced. Tasks that require sustained attention, decision-making, or emotional regulation can contribute to an overall sense of depletion, even in the absence of heavy physical work. This interaction is supported by research in neuroscience and physiology, showing that mental and physical processes share overlapping resources and regulatory pathways. As a result, the body does not always distinguish clearly between different kinds of effort when generating the sensation of fatigue. The feeling of being tired can emerge from the combined effect of multiple demands, rather than from a single identifiable source. When these aspects are considered together, the experience of early fatigue begins to take on a different meaning. It is not simply a measure of how strong or weak the body is. It reflects how the body evaluates patterns of use, transitions between states, and the balance between conservation and activity. These evaluations are based on systems that were shaped in environments where energy had to be managed carefully across uncertain conditions. That underlying logic remains consistent, even when the structure of daily life changes. The body continues to operate as if it must maintain a reserve, adjust gradually, and avoid unnecessary risk. This perspective does not provide a simple answer to why fatigue appears when it does. Instead, it suggests that the timing of fatigue is part of a larger process, one that connects present experience to the long history of how human physiology developed. And within that connection, the sensation of wearing out may not be a sign of decline, but a reflection of how the body continues to follow patterns that were formed long before the conditions of modern life took shape. When looking at animals in their natural environments, there is often an impression of efficiency that seems effortless. Movements appear measured, purposeful, and closely tied to immediate needs. An animal may remain still for long periods, and then move with clarity when required, without the same lingering sense of depletion that humans often describe. This difference can create the impression that animals possess a kind of endurance or recovery that humans have lost. Yet from a biological standpoint, both humans and other animals rely on the same fundamental principles of energy use. The distinction lies less in capacity and more in how energy is distributed across time and behavior. In most animal species, activity is closely linked to survival tasks such as foraging, avoiding threats, or maintaining territory. These tasks are not constant, but when they occur, they tend to follow patterns shaped by the environment. Periods of rest are integrated into these patterns, often in ways that support recovery without fully separating it from the rhythm of daily life. This integration means that rest is not always a complete stop. It can involve subtle adjustments, low-level muscle activity, and ongoing awareness of surroundings. Because of this, the transition between rest and movement is often gradual, allowing the body to maintain a certain level of readiness even during inactivity. In humans, the pattern can be more segmented. Periods of stillness may involve minimal physical engagement, followed by activity that requires a rapid increase in effort. This contrast can influence how energy is perceived and how fatigue develops. When the body moves from a low-activity state to a higher demand without gradual progression, the systems involved in movement and circulation must adjust more quickly. This can lead to a stronger sensation of effort, even if the absolute level of activity is not high. Over time, repeated exposure to such patterns can shape the way fatigue is experienced, making it seem as though energy is being used less efficiently. Another difference lies in the predictability of behavior. Many animals operate within relatively stable patterns that are influenced by environmental cues such as light, temperature, and the availability of food. These cues help regulate internal processes, including metabolism and hormone release. Because activity often follows these cues, the body can anticipate changes and prepare accordingly. In humans, daily patterns can vary widely and may not always align with natural environmental signals. This variability can affect how the body organizes energy use, as internal systems rely on consistent patterns to function most efficiently. Without predictable cues, the timing of energy release and recovery may become less coordinated, contributing to the perception of irregular fatigue. It is also important to consider that animals are not free from fatigue. They experience limitations, and their behavior reflects strategies to manage energy carefully. Many species avoid unnecessary movement, conserving energy for essential tasks. This conservation is not a sign of weakness, but an adaptive approach to survival. Humans share this underlying principle, but the context in which it operates has changed. Activities that require energy are not always directly connected to immediate biological needs, and rest may not always occur in a way that supports gradual recovery. As a result, the signals that guide energy use can feel less aligned with daily demands. From an evolutionary perspective, humans developed as part of the same ecological systems as other animals, with bodies adapted to respond to environmental pressures over long periods. The similarities in physiology remain evident in how muscles contract, how the heart responds to activity, and how energy is stored and released. The differences observed today are more closely related to behavior and context than to fundamental biological structure. When these factors are taken into account, the comparison between humans and animals becomes less about one being stronger or more resilient than the other, and more about how different patterns of life influence the way energy is used and experienced. In this light, the perception that animals do not wear out as quickly may reflect the alignment between their behavior and the conditions in which their bodies operate, rather than a difference in the underlying systems themselves. Another layer of this difference becomes clearer when attention shifts from visible movement to the internal timing of activity and rest. In many animal species, patterns of behavior are closely aligned with cycles that repeat in a consistent way, such as the progression of light and darkness, or seasonal changes in temperature and food availability. These external cues are known to influence internal biological rhythms, guiding when the body becomes active, when it conserves energy, and how it transitions between these states. Because these rhythms are relatively stable, the body can prepare in advance for expected changes, adjusting hormone levels, metabolism, and alertness in a coordinated manner. This preparation reduces the need for abrupt adjustments, allowing activity and rest to flow into one another with less strain. In humans, the relationship between internal rhythms and external cues can be less consistent. While the same biological systems are present, daily patterns may shift in ways that are not always synchronized with natural cycles. Activity can occur at varying times, and rest may not always coincide with the body's internal signals for recovery. When this alignment becomes irregular, the coordination between different physiological systems may be affected. The body still attempts to maintain balance, but it may do so by generating signals such as fatigue at times that feel unexpected or inconvenient. This does not indicate a malfunction, but rather a response to variability in the timing of activity and rest. Over time, these responses can shape the overall experience of energy use, making it seem less stable or predictable. A related factor is the way animals distribute effort within their periods of activity. In many cases, movement is organized around specific tasks that have clear beginnings and endings, such as searching for food or moving between locations. Within these tasks, effort can vary, but it often follows a pattern that allows for brief adjustments without fully stopping. Small pauses, changes in pace, and shifts in posture provide opportunities for partial recovery without breaking the continuity of movement. These micro-adjustments are subtle, yet they contribute to maintaining efficiency over longer periods. In contrast, human activity can sometimes lack this continuity. Tasks may require sustained focus without physical variation, or they may involve prolonged stillness followed by concentrated effort. Without intermediate adjustments, the body may not have the opportunity to regulate effort gradually. When activity resumes after a period of minimal movement, the transition can feel more demanding, and the signals associated with fatigue may become more pronounced. This pattern highlights the importance of variation within activity, not only in intensity but also in form. The ability to shift between different types of movement, even at low levels, supports the systems involved in energy distribution and can influence how fatigue is perceived. There is also the matter of how energy conservation is expressed. Animals often conserve energy by limiting unnecessary movement, but when they do act, their behavior is closely tied to immediate needs. This connection creates a clear relationship between effort and outcome, which can influence how the body regulates energy use. In humans, the connection between effort and direct biological necessity is not always present. Activities may require energy without leading to immediate physical outcomes, and rest may occur without a clear transition back into movement. This difference does not alter the underlying biology, but it can affect how the regulatory systems interpret signals from the body. The result may be a sense that energy is being used without a corresponding rhythm of recovery. From a broader perspective, these observations suggest that the experience of fatigue is shaped by timing, continuity, and alignment with internal rhythms. The human body retains the capacity to manage energy in ways similar to other animals, but the conditions under which this capacity operates have become more variable. When patterns of activity and rest do not follow consistent cues, the body may rely more heavily on protective signaling to maintain balance. This can lead to sensations of tiredness that appear earlier or persist longer than expected. Rather than indicating a fundamental difference in ability, these sensations reflect how the body responds to patterns that differ from those in which its regulatory systems were formed. And within that response, the comparison between humans and other animals becomes less about endurance alone and more about how each organism remains connected to the timing and structure of its environment. A further distinction can be observed in how effort is anticipated and regulated before it even begins. In many animals, behavior is closely linked to immediate cues in the environment, and these cues often signal not only when to act, but how much effort is required. The body responds by preparing in advance, adjusting circulation, muscle readiness, and alertness in ways that match the expected demand. This form of anticipation allows activity to begin within a state that is already partially adapted, reducing the sense of abrupt strain. The transition into movement feels aligned with the body's internal state, because preparation and action are closely connected. In humans, anticipation can take a different form. The brain is capable of projecting effort into the future, evaluating tasks before they occur, and this evaluation can influence how the body responds even before movement begins. Research in physiology and neuroscience suggests that expectations, attention, and perceived difficulty can alter how effort is experienced. When a task is interpreted as demanding, the body may initiate protective responses earlier, adjusting motor output and generating sensations associated with fatigue. This does not require actual depletion of energy reserves, It reflects a regulatory process in which the brain integrates available information to guide behavior. As a result, fatigue can appear not only as a response to physical activity, but also as part of the preparation for it. This layer of regulation adds complexity to how humans experience energy use. The body is not only responding to what is happening, but also to what is expected to happen. When expectations are uncertain or vary frequently, the coordination between preparation and action may become less consistent. The body may prepare for higher effort than is required, or it may respond cautiously in situations where demand is unclear. These responses are grounded in biological mechanisms that aim to maintain stability, yet they can contribute to the perception that energy is being used inefficiently. In contrast, animals often operate within more immediate feedback loops, where preparation is closely tied to direct sensory input. This difference does not imply that one system is superior, but it highlights how additional layers of cognitive processing can influence the timing and intensity of fatigue. Another aspect to consider is how recovery is initiated. In animals, recovery often begins as soon as the demand decreases, and it is integrated into ongoing behavior. Subtle changes in posture, reduced intensity of movement, or brief pauses can allow physiological systems to shift toward restoration without a clear boundary between activity and rest. This continuous adjustment supports a steady balance between energy use and recovery. In humans, recovery may be more distinctly separated, with periods designated for rest that follow activity rather than blending with it. While this structure can be effective in many contexts, it may also create situations where recovery is delayed until after fatigue has already been strongly signaled. The body, responding to this delay, may amplify sensations of tiredness as a way of encouraging a more immediate reduction in effort. Over time, this pattern can influence how fatigue is experienced, making it feel more pronounced or longer lasting. When these elements are brought together, the comparison between humans and other animals reveals a difference in how energy use is guided across time. Animals tend to operate within systems where anticipation, action, and recovery are closely aligned with immediate environmental cues, creating a flow that supports gradual transitions. Humans share the same physiological foundations, but the addition of complex cognitive processes and variable patterns of activity can alter how these systems interact. The result is not a loss of capacity, but a change in how signals are generated and interpreted. Fatigue, in this context, becomes part of a broader regulatory process that includes expectation, timing, and the coordination between different systems. It reflects how the body navigates both physical and cognitive demands, maintaining balance even when conditions are less predictable. And within this process, the sense that humans wear out more quickly may arise from the way these layers of regulation interact, rather than from a fundamental difference in the body's ability to endure. There is a quiet assumption that rest begins when movement ends, as if stopping were enough to allow the body to recover. This idea feels natural, yet from a biological perspective, rest is not simply the absence of activity. It is a process that depends on how the body transitions between states, how systems remain engaged at low levels, and how continuity is preserved even when visible movement slows down. When rest is understood only as stillness, an important part of how recovery actually works can be overlooked. The body does not move between activity and rest as if switching between two separate modes. Instead, it operates along a spectrum where different levels of effort blend into one another over time. In physiological terms, recovery involves coordinated changes in circulation, muscle activity, and neural signaling. Blood flow continues to adjust, carrying oxygen and nutrients while removing metabolic byproducts. Muscles do not become completely inactive. They maintain tone, shift subtly, and respond to small changes in posture. The nervous system modulates these processes, balancing alertness and relaxation in a gradual way. When transitions are smooth, these systems remain synchronized, and recovery can begin even before activity has fully ended. This continuity is a key feature of how the body manages energy. Looking across human development, patterns of movement were rarely organized into clearly separated periods of work and rest. Activities were often distributed across the day, with variations in intensity rather than abrupt stops. Walking might slow to standing, standing might shift to sitting on uneven ground, and each of these states still involved some level of engagement with the environment. These subtle variations allowed the body to adjust gradually, maintaining circulation and muscle activity at levels that supported ongoing recovery. Anthropological observations suggest that such patterns were common in many contexts, where the environment itself required constant, low-level adaptation. The ground was not uniform, temperatures changed, and attention to surroundings remained necessary. Under these conditions, rest was embedded within movement, not isolated from it. When rest becomes a complete withdrawal from activity, the dynamics of recovery can change. Extended stillness may reduce the variability that supports circulation and muscle engagement. The body shifts into a state that is less prepared for immediate movement, and when activity resumes, the transition may feel more demanding. This does not mean that stillness is harmful. It highlights that the body responds not only to how much rest occurs, but to how that rest is structured. If recovery is delayed until after activity has fully stopped, the signals that encourage rest may become stronger, as the body seeks to restore balance more quickly. This can contribute to the sensation that fatigue persists even after periods of inactivity, because the underlying processes are adjusting to a different pattern than the one they are adapted to handle most smoothly. Another aspect of rest is its relationship to awareness. In many animals, rest does not imply complete disengagement from the environment. Even during periods of reduced movement, there is often a level of responsiveness that allows for gradual reactivation. This state supports a fluid transition between rest and action, minimizing abrupt changes in effort. In humans, rest can sometimes involve a deeper disengagement, particularly when attention is directed away from physical surroundings. While this can provide mental relief, it may also alter how the body prepares to resume activity. The systems involved in movement may need to re-engage more rapidly, contributing to the perception of effort when activity begins again. This difference reflects how physical and cognitive states interact, influencing the overall experience of recovery. When these elements are considered together, rest emerges as an active, continuous process rather than a simple pause. It depends on transitions, low-level engagement, and alignment between different physiological systems. The body is capable of recovering in many conditions, but the efficiency of that recovery is influenced by how closely patterns of rest resemble the conditions under which these systems developed. As daily life introduces more distinct boundaries between activity and stillness, the signals associated with fatigue and recovery may shift, not because the body has changed, but because the context in which it operates has become more segmented. And within that segmentation, the meaning of rest itself becomes less clear, raising the possibility that stopping is not always the same as recovering, even when it feels like it should be. If rest is not simply the absence of movement, then the quality of rest becomes as important as its duration. 2 periods of equal length can lead to very different outcomes, depending on how the body moves into and out of them. From a physiological point of view, the transition into rest is not an instant shift. It involves a gradual rebalancing of systems that were previously engaged in activity. Heart rate slows, but not immediately. Breathing changes its pattern, but does so over time. Muscles reduce their level of contraction, yet they continue to maintain a certain readiness. These changes are coordinated through the nervous system, which adjusts signals across the body in response to both internal conditions and external context. When this transition is allowed to unfold gradually, recovery can begin while the body is still partially active. When the transition is abrupt, the coordination between systems may be less smooth, and recovery may feel delayed or incomplete. This idea becomes clearer when considering how movement was distributed across long periods in earlier human contexts. Activities were often linked together without sharp boundaries. A period of walking might slow into standing. Standing might involve shifting weight or interacting with objects, and these changes created a continuous range of effort rather than distinct categories. Each small adjustment provided an opportunity for certain muscles to rest while others remained engaged. Circulation adapted to these changes, supporting the exchange of oxygen and nutrients in a steady manner. Because no single system was required to stop completely, recovery could occur alongside ongoing activity. This pattern does not eliminate fatigue, but it alters how and when fatigue is experienced. Instead of building rapidly and requiring a full stop, it tends to accumulate more gradually, allowing the body to maintain function over longer periods. In contrast, when activity is followed by complete stillness, the body enters a different state. Muscular engagement decreases significantly, and the signals that maintain readiness are reduced. While this can provide a form of rest, it also creates a sharper contrast between states. When movement resumes, especially if it requires coordination or strength, the systems involved must reactivate more quickly. This reactivation can feel effortful, even if the activity itself is not demanding. The sensation of fatigue in this case is influenced not only by previous effort, but by the abruptness of the transition between inactivity and movement. Over time, repeated exposure to such transitions can shape the way the body anticipates effort, reinforcing the perception that recovery is incomplete. Another element to consider is how the body manages internal resources during rest. Processes such as glycogen restoration, removal of metabolic byproducts, and tissue repair continue after activity ends, but they do not operate at the same rate under all conditions. Gentle movement, variations in posture, and continued circulation can support these processes by maintaining a flow of resources through the body. When the body is entirely still for extended periods, certain aspects of circulation may become less dynamic, potentially slowing the pace at which these processes occur. This does not prevent recovery, but it may influence how quickly the body returns to a state where effort feels comfortable. The perception of fatigue, in this sense, is linked to how effectively these internal processes are supported during periods of rest. There is also a connection between rest and attention. When attention is directed inward or toward physical surroundings, subtle adjustments in posture and movement often continue without conscious effort. These adjustments help maintain alignment and circulation, contributing to a more gradual form of recovery. When attention is directed away from the body, especially for extended periods, these adjustments may become less frequent. The body remains still for longer intervals and the transitions back into movement may become more pronounced. This interaction between attention and physical state illustrates how rest is influenced not only by what the body does, but also by how it is engaged at a cognitive level. When these factors are considered together, it becomes clear that rest is shaped by transitions, variability, and the ongoing interaction between systems. It is not defined solely by stillness or by the absence of effort. The body is capable of recovering in many different ways, but the efficiency of that recovery depends on how closely the pattern of rest aligns with the conditions under which the body is accustomed to functioning. As patterns become more segmented, with clearer boundaries between activity and inactivity, the signals associated with recovery may change, influencing how fatigue is experienced even when the amount of rest appears sufficient. And within this shift, the question of what it means to truly rest becomes more complex than simply stopping and waiting for energy to return. When rest is approached as a separate state that begins only after activity has fully ended, an important relationship within the body can become less visible. Recovery does not wait for a complete stop. It begins as soon as conditions allow it, often while movement is still taking place at lower intensities. This means that the boundary between effort and recovery is not fixed, but fluid, shaped by how smoothly the body moves across different levels of activity. When this fluidity is present, fatigue and recovery are interwoven, each moderating the other. When it is absent, the two can become more sharply divided, and the experience of fatigue may feel more pronounced as a result. From a physiological standpoint, many processes associated with recovery are continuous. Blood flow adjusts in response to changing demands, delivering oxygen and removing metabolic byproducts in a steady exchange. Muscle fibers shift between patterns of contraction, allowing some to rest while others remain active. The nervous system coordinates these adjustments, modulating signals that balance effort and relaxation. These processes do not require complete stillness to function. In many cases, they are supported by gentle, ongoing movement that maintains circulation and variability. When movement decreases gradually rather than stopping abruptly, these systems can remain engaged, allowing recovery to proceed without interruption. This perspective is supported by observations across a range of human contexts, where endurance is often associated with the ability to maintain low levels of activity over extended periods rather than alternating between extremes. Considering the longer arc of human development, patterns of life were rarely organized into clear segments of work followed by rest. Instead, activity tended to fluctuate in intensity, influenced by environmental conditions and immediate needs. A period of greater effort might be followed by a slower pace, but not necessarily by complete inactivity. This variability allowed different parts of the body to share the load over time, reducing the need for any single system to reach a point of exhaustion quickly. Anthropological evidence, while diverse in its details, consistently points to the importance of adaptability and continuity in human movement. The body was engaged with its surroundings in a way that required constant adjustment, and this engagement supported both function and recovery at the same time. In contrast, when rest is treated as a complete pause, the systems that support gradual recovery may become less active. Circulation slows to a more uniform pattern, muscle activity decreases across broader areas, and the nervous system may shift toward a state that is less prepared for immediate change. While this state can provide rest, it also creates a more distinct transition when activity resumes. The body must move from a condition of low engagement to one of higher demand in a shorter span of time. This transition can amplify the sensation of effort, even if the activity itself is moderate. Over repeated cycles, this pattern can influence how the body anticipates movement, reinforcing the perception that energy is limited and that fatigue arrives quickly. Another dimension of this process involves how recovery is perceived rather than how it occurs. The sensation of feeling restored is not always synchronized with the underlying biological processes. The body may be engaged in recovery, even when fatigue is still present as a sensation. This difference between process and perception is important because it shapes how rest is interpreted. If recovery is expected to feel immediate and complete, the persistence of fatigue may be seen as a sign that rest has been insufficient. In reality, the body may be continuing its gradual adjustments, operating on timescales that are not always aligned with conscious awareness. This can create a sense of disconnect, where rest does not seem to produce the expected result, even though internal processes are ongoing. When these elements are brought together, rest appears not as a distinct phase, but as part of a continuous cycle that includes varying levels of activity. The effectiveness of recovery depends on how smoothly the body can move along this cycle, maintaining coordination between systems and avoiding abrupt transitions that disrupt internal balance. As patterns of daily life introduce clearer separations between activity and stillness, the body continues to operate according to principles that favor continuity. The resulting experience of fatigue and recovery reflects this tension between a system designed for gradual change and conditions that often impose sharper boundaries. Within this tension, the idea that rest is simply a matter of stopping becomes less certain, and the question of how the body truly recovers remains open, shaped by patterns that extend far beyond any single moment of stillness. The human body carries within it a design that favors continuity over extremes. Muscles, joints, and the systems that support them are not arranged only for moments of intense effort, but for the ability to sustain low levels of movement across long periods of time. This design becomes more visible when observing how different parts of the body share the work of movement. Walking, for example, is not a single action but a coordinated sequence involving the legs, the core, the arms, and the constant adjustment of balance. Each step distributes effort across multiple muscle groups, allowing no single area to bear the full load for too long. This distribution supports endurance by reducing the accumulation of strain in any one place. When movement is continuous and varied, the body can maintain function with less pronounced signals of fatigue. From a physiological perspective, this capacity is supported by the types of muscle fibers that are commonly used during low-intensity activity. Human muscles contain a mixture of fibers that differ in how they generate force and how they use energy. Some fibers are adapted for quick, powerful contractions, while others are more efficient at sustaining activity over time. The latter rely heavily on aerobic metabolism, using oxygen to produce energy in a way that can be maintained without rapid depletion. These fibers are engaged during activities such as walking, standing, and maintaining posture, all of which are fundamental to daily movement. When these patterns are used consistently, the body operates within a range that supports stability and gradual energy use. The heart and lungs are also part of this design. They are capable of responding to increased demand, but they function most efficiently when changes in activity occur progressively. A steady rhythm of movement allows the cardiovascular system to adjust without sudden shifts, maintaining circulation and supporting the delivery of oxygen and nutrients. This stability reduces the need for rapid compensation, which can otherwise contribute to the sensation of strain. When movement is continuous, even at low intensity, the body remains in a state where these systems are already engaged, making transitions smoother and less demanding. Looking at the broader context of human development, these characteristics align with patterns of activity that required persistence rather than short bursts of maximum effort. Movement across landscapes, the need to adapt to uneven terrain, and the ongoing interaction with the environment all favored a form of endurance that was steady and adaptable. Archaeological evidence of long-distance travel and the distribution of resources suggests that humans were capable of maintaining such activity over extended periods. The exact details of these patterns varied, but the underlying principle of sustained, moderate movement is widely supported. This does not imply that intense effort was absent, but that it was part of a larger pattern in which lower levels of activity were more constant. When these patterns are contrasted with more segmented forms of movement, the difference in how fatigue is experienced becomes clearer. Activities that involve sudden increases in effort, especially after periods of minimal movement, can place greater demand on systems that are adapted for gradual change. Muscles may be required to generate force more quickly, the cardiovascular system must respond rapidly, and the coordination between these elements may feel less stable. Even if the total amount of work is not high, the abruptness of the demand can influence how the body interprets it. This interpretation is reflected in the sensation of fatigue, which may appear sooner under these conditions. Another factor is the role of posture and subtle movement. The human body is rarely completely still, even when it appears to be at rest. Small adjustments in balance, shifts in weight, and changes in alignment contribute to maintaining function. These micro-movements engage muscles at low levels, supporting circulation and preventing stiffness. When such variability is reduced, the body may become less prepared for larger movements, and the transition into activity can feel more effortful. Over time, patterns that limit these small adjustments can influence how easily the body returns to movement, shaping the overall experience of energy use. When these elements are considered together, the design of the human body appears oriented toward a form of activity that is continuous, varied, and moderate in intensity. This design does not eliminate fatigue, but it influences how fatigue develops and how it is perceived. The body is prepared to sustain movement across time, adjusting gradually to changes in demand. When patterns of activity align with this design, the signals associated with fatigue tend to emerge in a way that reflects steady use rather than abrupt depletion. And within this alignment, the question of why the body feels worn out more quickly may begin to shift, not toward a loss of capacity, but toward the relationship between how the body is built to move and how it is often asked to move in the present. A body shaped for continuous movement does not only depend on muscles that can endure, it also depends on structures that reduce the cost of repeating small actions over and over again. The foot, the ankle, the knee, the hip, and the spine form a chain that can absorb force, transfer weight, and return energy in a rhythm that favors repetition. This is one of the quiet strengths of the human body. Walking across ground is not only a matter of pushing forward, it is also a matter of storing and releasing force through tendons, of stabilizing the trunk so that the limbs can move efficiently, and of adjusting each step in response to slight changes in surface and balance. When movement happens this way, the body does not rely on isolated bursts of strength. It relies on coordinated economy. This economy is one reason low to moderate movement can be sustained for long periods without immediate collapse. It also helps explain why the body often feels more settled during gentle repetition than during irregular effort. The human foot offers a clear example. Its arches help manage impact and distribute pressure, while the tendons and ligaments contribute to the spring-like quality of each step. The ankle allows both mobility and stability, giving the body a way to respond to uneven surfaces without fully breaking the flow of motion. Higher up, the long muscles and connective tissues of the legs support repeated cycles of contraction and release. The pelvis and spine then help organize the body above that movement, keeping the center of mass balanced as one side shifts and the other receives weight. None of this makes the human body mechanically perfect, and it does not mean movement is effortless. It means the body is arranged to reduce waste when movement is continuous and rhythmical. This arrangement becomes less visible when movement is rare, brief, or suddenly intense. The same structures are still present, but they are being used in a different pattern. Breathing also plays a role in this economy. During steady movement, breathing can gradually match the rhythm of the body, supporting oxygen delivery without sharp disruption. The cardiovascular system benefits from this continuity. Blood flow increases in a progressive way, temperature regulation has time to adjust, and the nervous system does not need to respond as if a sudden emergency has appeared. In such conditions, effort is spread across time. The body is not being asked to leap from stillness into high demand. It is being allowed to build momentum. This matters because fatigue is influenced not only by the amount of work done, but by how abruptly systems are required to change state. A gradual rise in demand often feels more manageable than a short rise that is steeper, even when the total output is similar. Looking across the longer human story, this kind of steady movement fits what is broadly understood about how humans lived in varied landscapes. Travel was often done on foot. Ground conditions were rarely uniform. Daily effort may have included carrying, climbing, bending, and standing, but these actions were usually woven into a broader flow rather than confined to narrow periods of deliberate exercise. Archaeological evidence cannot reconstruct every hour of prehistoric life, yet the anatomy of the skeleton, the endurance capacity seen in human physiology, and the demands of foraging and mobility all support the idea that frequent low-level movement was a central part of life. The body did not need to be in constant intense labor to be functioning in its expected range. It needed regularity, variation, and a world that kept it gently engaged. This is where the modern contrast becomes more revealing. When movement is compressed into brief episodes after long inactivity, the body often has fewer chances to distribute load naturally. The feet meet flatter surfaces, balance is challenged less often, posture becomes more fixed, and the chain of coordinated motion is asked to switch on quickly rather than remain quietly available. This can make effort feel heavier than the raw task would suggest. It is not simply that muscles are weaker, it is that the whole system of economical repetition is being interrupted. Even posture itself begins to matter here. Standing, shifting weight, turning, reaching, and walking short distances all help preserve the body's sense of ongoing readiness. When those small forms of motion are missing, larger movements may feel like they begin from too far away, as if the body must cross a wider gap before it can move smoothly again. In that sense, the human body is not only built for movement, but for being near movement most of the time. And once that continuity is broken, fatigue may arrive not because the body lacks design, but because its design is being asked to work without the gentle repetition it was built to expect. When the body is allowed to remain close to movement, even at very low levels, another pattern begins to appear. Effort no longer feels like a sharp demand placed on a resting system. Instead, it becomes a continuation of something already in progress. This difference is subtle, but it changes how fatigue develops. A system that is already active does not need to overcome the same initial resistance as one that has been still for a long time. Muscles are already receiving signals, circulation is already elevated to a moderate level, and the nervous system is already engaged in coordinating motion. In this state, adding more effort feels like an adjustment rather than a beginning. From a physiological standpoint, this reduces the contrast between states, and it is often this contrast that amplifies the sensation of strain. When contrast is low, transitions feel smoother, and the body can move between levels of activity with less disruption. This idea can be seen in how the body responds to gradual increases in demand. If movement begins slowly and builds over time, the systems involved in energy production and delivery have an opportunity to adjust in sequence. Enzymes involved in metabolism become more active, blood vessels expand to increase flow, and breathing deepens in a way that supports oxygen exchange. Each of these changes supports the next, creating a coordinated progression. When this progression is interrupted or skipped, the same systems must respond more quickly, often leading to a stronger perception of effort. This does not mean that the body is less capable, but that it is being asked to reorganize itself more abruptly. Over repeated experiences, this pattern can influence how the body anticipates movement, making it more sensitive to sudden changes and more likely to signal fatigue early. The relationship between continuity and readiness also extends to how the body maintains stability. Balance is not a fixed state, but a dynamic process that depends on constant feedback from the senses and small adjustments in muscle activity. When movement is ongoing, even at low intensity, this system remains active, refining coordination and maintaining awareness of position in space. When stillness is prolonged, the level of feedback decreases and the system becomes less responsive. As a result, When movement resumes, the body may require a brief period to regain the same level of coordination. This period can feel like effort, even if the physical demand is minimal. In this way, fatigue is not only related to energy use, but also to how quickly the body must restore coordination after inactivity. Considering the broader context of human development, this pattern of staying near movement would have been supported by environments that required constant adjustment. Uneven ground, changes in temperature, and the need to remain attentive to surroundings all contributed to a state where complete stillness was relatively rare. Even during periods of reduced activity, the body remained engaged with its environment through posture, balance, and awareness. This engagement allowed systems to remain partially active, reducing the need for abrupt transitions. While it is not possible to describe every detail of past behavior with certainty, the combination of anatomical structure and environmental demands supports the idea that continuity of movement played an important role in how the body functioned over time. When these conditions are compared with more segmented patterns of activity, the difference in how fatigue is experienced becomes clearer. If the body spends long periods in a low-activity state and is then asked to perform a task that requires coordination and effort, the transition can feel disproportionate. The systems that support movement must increase their activity rapidly, and the signals associated with this change may be interpreted as strain. Even moderate tasks can feel more demanding under these conditions, not because they exceed the body's capacity, but because they require a larger adjustment from the current state. Over time, this pattern can create a sense that energy is limited, or that endurance has decreased, even though the underlying capacity remains largely intact. When viewed together, these observations suggest that the human body functions most smoothly when it remains within a range of ongoing activity, where changes in demand are gradual and systems remain engaged. The design of muscles, joints, circulation, and neural control all support this form of continuity. When activity patterns move away from this range, introducing longer periods of stillness followed by abrupt effort, the experience of fatigue may shift accordingly. The body is still capable of performing, but it does so under conditions that require more pronounced transitions. And within those transitions, the feeling of wearing out may arise not from a loss of strength, but from the distance the body must travel each time it moves from stillness into motion. The environment in which the human body moves is not a passive background, it is an active partner in how effort is shaped, distributed, and experienced. Surfaces, temperature, elevation, and the presence of natural variation all influence how the body organizes movement. When these elements are present, they introduce small, constant changes that require the body to adapt in subtle ways. Each step may be slightly different from the last. Each shift in posture may respond to a new condition, and this variability creates a continuous dialogue between the body and its surroundings. In this dialogue, no single pattern of movement is repeated without adjustment. Instead, movement becomes a series of small variations, each one engaging different muscles and supporting a more balanced distribution of effort. This kind of interaction is supported by basic principles of biomechanics and motor control, where variability is known to play a role in maintaining function and reducing localized strain. In environments that offer uneven ground, changes in resistance, or variations in temperature, the body does not settle into a single fixed pattern. The feet adjust to differences in surface, the joints respond to shifts in balance, and the muscles coordinate these changes in a way that spreads load across the system. Circulation adapts to these variations, supporting different areas as they become active. Over time, this process can help prevent the accumulation of stress in any one region, allowing the body to sustain activity with less pronounced fatigue. The nervous system also benefits from this variability, as it continuously updates its understanding of the body's position and movement, maintaining a state of readiness that supports smooth transitions. When the environment becomes more uniform, this interaction changes. Flat, consistent surfaces reduce the need for adjustment, and the body may begin to repeat the same patterns of movement with less variation. While this can increase efficiency in a narrow sense, it can also concentrate effort in specific areas. The same muscles may be engaged in similar ways for extended periods, and the opportunity for redistribution of load becomes more limited. Over time, this concentration can influence how fatigue is experienced, as certain regions of the body may signal strain more quickly. This does not mean that uniform environments are inherently harmful. but it highlights how variation contributes to the balance of effort across the body. Temperature and exposure also play a role in how the body manages energy. In changing conditions, the body must regulate heat, adjust circulation, and maintain internal balance. These processes require energy, but they also engage systems that support overall function. The need to respond to environmental changes keeps these systems active, contributing to a form of low-level engagement that aligns with continuous movement. When environmental conditions are more stable, the demands on these systems may decrease, and the body may operate within a narrower range of responses. This stability can be comfortable, yet it may also reduce the level of ongoing adjustment that supports resilience over time. From a broader perspective, human physiology developed in environments that were rarely constant. Landscapes varied, weather shifted, and movement required adaptation to these changes. Anthropological and ecological research indicates that such variability was a consistent feature of human experience, even though specific conditions differed across regions. The body's ability to respond to this variability is reflected in its structure and function, from the flexibility of joints to the adaptability of metabolic processes. These features do not depend on extreme conditions, but on the presence of change itself. Variation provides the context in which these systems operate most fully. When this context is reduced, the body continues to function, but it does so with fewer opportunities to distribute effort and engage multiple systems simultaneously. This can influence how energy is perceived and how fatigue develops. The absence of variation does not remove the body's capacity for endurance, but it may alter the pathways through which endurance is expressed. Effort may become more localized, transitions between states may feel more pronounced, and the signals associated with fatigue may appear in ways that reflect this concentration. In this sense, the environment is not separate from the body's experience of energy. It shapes how movement unfolds, how systems interact, and how fatigue is interpreted. And within that relationship, the question of why the body feels worn out more quickly may begin to point not only to the body itself, but to the conditions in which it is asked to operate. Variation in the environment does not only influence how the body moves, it also shapes how the body senses itself while moving. The information that comes from the skin, the joints, and the muscles is constantly being updated as conditions change. This flow of information allows the nervous system to adjust movement in real time, refining balance, coordination, and the distribution of effort. When surfaces differ slightly from step to step, or when temperature shifts across the skin, these signals become more varied. The body responds by making small corrections, often without conscious awareness. These corrections keep multiple systems engaged at low levels, supporting a form of readiness that blends movement and recovery into a continuous process. In neuroscience, this ongoing feedback is part of how the brain maintains an internal model of the body in space, and it depends on regular input from a changing environment. When that input becomes limited, the model may become less detailed, and movement may rely more heavily on repeated patterns rather than ongoing adjustment. In more uniform conditions, the range of sensory input can narrow. Surfaces that are flat and consistent provide fewer cues for variation, and the body may begin to move in a more repetitive way. This repetition is not inherently inefficient, but it can reduce the diversity of signals that support coordination. When the same pathways are used repeatedly without variation, certain muscles and joints may take on a larger share of the work. Over time, this can influence how effort is experienced, as localized areas may reach a threshold of strain more quickly. The nervous system continues to monitor these signals, and when they become concentrated, it may respond by generating a stronger sensation of fatigue. This response reflects the body's effort to maintain balance across its systems, even when the pattern of movement offers fewer opportunities for redistribution. Another aspect of environmental variation is its effect on timing. In changing conditions, movement often adjusts in pace as well as form. Walking on uneven ground may slow slightly, then speed up as the surface becomes more stable. These shifts in pace create natural fluctuations in effort, allowing brief periods of lower demand to occur within ongoing activity. Such fluctuations can support recovery without requiring a complete stop, as certain systems momentarily reduce their output while others remain active. In more consistent environments, pace may remain steady for longer periods, and the opportunity for these natural fluctuations may decrease. The result is a more continuous level of demand placed on the same systems, which can influence how fatigue accumulates. Even when the overall intensity is moderate, the absence of variation in timing can contribute to a sense of sustained effort that feels more taxing than it might in a more variable setting. Temperature and airflow also contribute to this process in subtle ways. Small changes in temperature can influence circulation, encouraging the body to adjust blood flow to maintain balance. Airflow across the skin provides sensory input that supports awareness of movement and position. These elements are often taken for granted, yet they play a role in maintaining the dynamic state in which the body operates most effectively. When conditions are stable and controlled, these sources of variation may be reduced, and the body may receive fewer signals that prompt ongoing adjustment. This does not prevent movement or recovery, but it can alter the context in which these processes occur. From an evolutionary perspective, the human body developed in environments where such variation was the norm rather than the exception. Landscapes, weather, and daily conditions introduced constant change, requiring the body to remain adaptable. The systems that support movement, coordination, and energy use are built to respond to this variability, integrating sensory input with motor output in a continuous loop. This integration supports not only movement, but also the regulation of effort, helping to distribute load and prevent excessive strain in any one area. When variation is present, the body has more opportunities to balance its internal processes across time. When it is limited, the same processes must operate within a narrower range, and the signals that guide them may become more pronounced. Taken together, these observations suggest that the environment contributes to fatigue not by increasing or decreasing energy directly, but by shaping how that energy is used and perceived. Variation provides a framework in which movement can remain dynamic, allowing recovery to occur alongside activity and supporting the distribution of effort across the body. Without this framework, movement may become more uniform, and the experience of fatigue may shift accordingly. In this way, the environment does not simply surround the body. It participates in how the body organizes its work, influencing the balance between effort and recovery in ways that are often subtle, yet deeply connected to how the human system has long operated. When the environment offers fewer changes, the body is not only moving differently, it is also learning differently. Movement is not a fixed program that the body simply repeats. It is shaped through ongoing adaptation, where each variation in surface, balance, or resistance contributes to how the nervous system refines its control over muscles and joints. This process is often described in motor learning as a form of continuous calibration, where small differences in conditions lead to small adjustments in coordination. Over time, these adjustments create a more flexible and responsive system, capable of distributing effort across multiple pathways rather than relying on a single repeated pattern. When variation is present, the body is constantly updating how it moves, and this updating helps prevent the accumulation of strain in specific areas. When variation is limited, the opportunity for such calibration becomes reduced, and movement may settle into narrower patterns that are repeated with less adjustment. This narrowing does not prevent the body from functioning, but it can influence how fatigue develops. Repetition without variation can concentrate load in predictable ways. The same joints may move through the same ranges, the same muscles may contract in similar sequences, and the same tissues may absorb force in similar locations. Over time, this consistency can lead to earlier signals of discomfort or fatigue, not because the overall effort is greater, but because it is less evenly distributed. The body responds to these signals through regulatory mechanisms that aim to protect against overuse. Fatigue, in this context, becomes a way of encouraging change, prompting the system to reduce intensity or alter movement. When variation is already present, this redistribution can occur naturally. When variation is limited, the signal may appear more abruptly, as the system has fewer alternative pathways available within the current pattern. This relationship between variation and distribution also affects how the body transitions between states of activity and rest. In more variable environments, transitions tend to be gradual, supported by ongoing adjustments in movement and posture. The body does not move from one fixed state to another, but shifts along a range of possibilities, maintaining engagement at different levels. This continuity allows recovery processes to operate alongside activity, reducing the need for distinct periods of complete rest. In more uniform conditions, transitions may become more defined. activity is separated from rest, and the body moves between these states with clearer boundaries. While this structure can be practical, it may also increase the contrast between states, making each transition more noticeable. The sensation of fatigue can be influenced by this contrast, as the body must adjust more quickly when moving from stillness to activity or back again. Another dimension of environmental influence is its effect on attention and perception. When surroundings are varied, attention often shifts naturally, following changes in terrain, light, or temperature. These shifts are subtle, yet they keep the body engaged with its environment, supporting a continuous feedback loop between perception and movement. This loop helps maintain coordination and readiness, even during periods of lower activity. When the environment is more consistent, attention may become more fixed or directed away from physical surroundings. This change in focus can reduce the frequency of small adjustments that support ongoing movement, leading to longer periods of relative stillness. As a result, the transition back into movement may feel more pronounced, contributing to the experience of effort. Looking across the broader context of human development, the presence of environmental variation appears to have been a consistent feature of daily life. While specific conditions differed, the need to respond to changing surroundings remained a central part of how the body functioned. The systems that support movement, coordination, and energy use are built to operate within this context, integrating variability as part of their normal function. When this context is reduced, the body continues to operate, but the patterns through which it manages effort and recovery may shift. Fatigue may appear in ways that reflect a more concentrated use of certain pathways, and recovery may feel less integrated into ongoing activity. When these elements are considered together, the role of the environment extends beyond providing a setting for movement. It influences how the body learns, how it distributes effort, and how it transitions between states. Variation supports flexibility, allowing the system to adapt and redistribute load in ways that reduce the buildup of strain. Without it, movement may become more predictable, and the signals associated with fatigue may emerge more clearly as the body seeks to maintain balance within a narrower range of conditions. And within this narrowing, the experience of wearing out may begin to reflect not only how much the body is asked to do, but how many different ways it is allowed to do it. Energy in the human body is not used in a neutral way. It is organized around purpose, even when that purpose is not immediately visible. From a biological perspective, the systems that regulate energy were shaped under conditions where effort was closely tied to outcomes that affected survival. Movement led to food, safety, or changes in position that had clear consequences. In such conditions, the use of energy was part of a cycle in which effort and result were directly connected. This connection influenced not only how energy was spent, but how it was perceived. When effort leads to a tangible outcome, the signals associated with that effort are interpreted within a context that provides meaning and direction. The body is not only using energy, it is participating in a process that has a clear structure. In humans, this relationship between energy and purpose remains embedded in physiology, even when the context changes. The brain plays a central role in this process, integrating information about effort, expectation, and outcome. Research in neuroscience and physiology suggests that the perception of effort is influenced by how the brain evaluates the significance of a task. When a task is associated with a clear objective, especially one that is perceived as important, the brain may regulate energy use differently than when the objective is less defined. This does not imply a simple cause and effect relationship, but it indicates that the experience of effort is shaped by both physical and cognitive factors. The same amount of physical work can feel different depending on how it is interpreted within a broader context. This variability is part of how the body manages its resources, balancing immediate demands with longer-term stability. When energy use is not closely linked to immediate biological outcomes, the internal signals that guide effort may become less aligned with the external task. Activities that require sustained attention or repetitive motion without a clear physical result can still demand energy, but the feedback loop between effort and outcome may be less direct. In such cases, the brain continues to monitor internal conditions, and it may generate signals of fatigue as part of its regulatory function. These signals are not arbitrary, they reflect the ongoing assessment of how energy is being used in relation to perceived need. When the connection between effort and outcome is less defined, the body may rely more heavily on protective mechanisms, encouraging rest or a reduction in activity even when physical resources are not fully depleted. Looking back across human development, the use of energy was often constrained by availability. Food intake varied, and the body developed mechanisms to store and conserve energy when necessary. These mechanisms include the ability to shift between different metabolic pathways and to adjust activity levels based on internal and external cues. When effort was required, it was typically associated with tasks that had immediate relevance, such as acquiring food or moving to a new location. Under these conditions, the regulation of energy use was closely tied to environmental feedback, creating a system in which effort and outcome were part of a continuous loop. This loop supported both efficiency and adaptability, allowing the body to respond to changing conditions while maintaining balance. In more recent contexts, the range of activities that require energy has expanded, and not all of these activities are linked to direct biological outcomes. The body continues to operate using the same regulatory principles, but the signals it generates may not always align with the structure of the task. Fatigue can appear as a way of guiding behavior, even when the physical demand is moderate. This does not indicate that the body is malfunctioning. It reflects the way in which energy regulation is influenced by both physical conditions and the interpretation of those conditions by the brain. The sensation of effort becomes part of a broader system that includes perception, expectation, and context. When these elements are considered together, the experience of wearing out can be seen as more than a simple measure of physical capacity. It reflects how energy is organized around purpose, how the body interprets the relationship between effort and outcome, and how these interpretations influence the signals that guide behavior. The human body retains the ability to manage energy in ways that support sustained activity, but the context in which this ability is expressed has changed. And within that change, the timing and intensity of fatigue may begin to reflect not only how much energy is used, but how that use is understood within the systems that regulate it. When the link between effort and outcome becomes less direct, the way the body allocates energy can begin to shift in subtle ways. This shift is not a change in the total amount of energy available, but in how that energy is distributed across different systems. The brain plays a central role in this distribution, continuously weighing signals from the body against the expected value of the task being performed. This process involves networks that regulate attention, motivation, and motor output, all of which interact with metabolic systems that supply energy to muscles and organs. When a task has a clear structure and a defined endpoint, these systems can align more easily, coordinating effort in a way that feels directed. When the structure is less defined, or when the outcome is distant or abstract, the alignment may be less precise, and the signals that guide effort can become more variable. This variability can influence how fatigue is experienced, even when physical demands remain constant. In physiology, the concept of central regulation suggests that the brain does not allow the body to use all available resources at once. Instead, it maintains a margin of safety, adjusting output based on ongoing assessment of internal conditions. This assessment includes factors such as energy availability, temperature, and the integrity of tissues, but it is also influenced by cognitive and emotional inputs. When the brain interprets a situation as uncertain or prolonged without clear resolution, it may favor conservation, reducing motor output and increasing the sensation of effort. This response is consistent with a system designed to protect long-term function rather than maximize short-term performance. It means that fatigue can emerge not only from physical strain, but from how the brain evaluates the context in which that strain occurs. In earlier human contexts, effort was often bounded by immediate conditions. Tasks such as gathering, traveling, or responding to environmental changes had natural limits defined by time, distance, or resource availability. These limits provided feedback that helped regulate energy use. The body could increase effort when needed and reduce it when the task was complete, with relatively clear transitions between states. This structure supported a cycle in which energy expenditure and recovery were closely linked to external events. Anthropological evidence suggests that while these patterns varied across environments, the presence of such boundaries was a consistent feature of human activity. The body's regulatory systems developed within this framework, where effort was part of a cycle that included both demand and resolution. In contrast, when tasks extend without clear boundaries, the signals that guide energy use may become less distinct. Activities that require sustained engagement over long periods, especially when the endpoint is not immediately visible, can create a different pattern of regulation. The brain may respond by moderating output more conservatively, as it cannot easily predict how long the demand will continue. This moderation can manifest as a steady sense of effort or fatigue that does not correspond directly to the intensity of the task. It reflects a cautious approach to energy management, where the system prioritizes endurance over immediate efficiency. Over time, repeated exposure to such patterns can influence how the body anticipates effort, shaping the baseline level of energy that is made available for activity. Another factor is the role of feedback in reinforcing energy use. When effort leads to a clear and immediate result, the brain receives signals that can support continued engagement. These signals may involve reward pathways that influence motivation and perception of effort. When feedback is delayed or less tangible, the connection between effort and outcome may weaken, and the regulatory systems may rely more heavily on internal signals to guide behavior. This can increase the prominence of fatigue as a cue, encouraging pauses or reductions in activity even when physical capacity remains. This interaction between feedback and regulation highlights how energy use is not only a physical process but also a perceptual one, shaped by how the body interprets the relationship between action and result. When these elements are considered together, the experience of fatigue appears as part of a broader system that integrates physical, cognitive, and environmental information. The body continues to manage energy according to principles that favor stability and adaptability, but the context in which these principles operate can influence how their effects are felt. When effort is aligned with clear purpose and bounded by identifiable conditions, energy use may feel more directed and sustainable. When alignment is less clear, the same systems may produce sensations that reflect caution and conservation. In this way, the feeling of wearing out can be seen not only as a response to physical demand, but as an expression of how the body organizes energy in relation to the meaning and structure of the tasks it performs. When the body cannot clearly define when effort will end or what it is leading toward, another quiet adjustment begins to take place. Instead of organizing energy around a known sequence, the system shifts toward preserving flexibility. This means that rather than committing fully to a task, the body maintains a level of reserve that allows it to respond to uncertainty. From a biological perspective, this is a cautious strategy. It reduces the risk of overextension in situations where future demands are unclear. However, it also changes how effort feels in the present. Activity may be accompanied by a steady sense of limitation, not because energy is absent, but because it is being held back. This sensation can resemble fatigue, even though the underlying purpose is conservation rather than depletion. The nervous system plays a central role in this adjustment. Signals from the body are continuously evaluated, and motor output is modulated in response to both internal conditions and expected future needs. When the endpoint of a task is uncertain, or when the task does not provide clear feedback about progress, the system may favor moderation. Muscles receive signals that limit force production, pacing becomes more cautious, and the subjective experience of effort increases. This pattern has been described in research on perception of effort, where the feeling of strain can rise even when objective measures of performance remain stable. The body is not simply reacting to what is happening now, it is preparing for what might happen next, and this preparation influences how energy is distributed. Looking across the longer history of human activity, many forms of effort were naturally bounded by the environment. Movement across a landscape had physical limits. Gathering tasks were constrained by available resources, and changes in light or weather signaled when activity would shift. These boundaries provided a framework within which energy could be allocated more confidently. The body could increase output when needed, knowing that the demand was finite and that recovery would follow within a predictable pattern. While the exact details of these conditions varied, the presence of such boundaries is supported by anthropological and ecological observations. The body's regulatory systems developed in contexts where effort was rarely indefinite. When this structure is less present, the internal logic of energy use may adapt in ways that are less visible but still influential. Another dimension of this process involves how the body responds to repetition without resolution. When similar demands are encountered repeatedly without a clear endpoint or variation in outcome, the system may begin to treat these demands as ongoing, rather than discrete. In such cases, energy is not organized around individual tasks but around a more continuous expectation of demand. This can lead to a baseline level of engagement that remains elevated, with fewer opportunities for full recovery between efforts. The sensation of fatigue in this context is not tied to a single activity, but to the accumulation of unresolved signals over time. The body continues to function, but it does so within a state that favors caution, maintaining readiness at the cost of a persistent sense of effort. There is also an interaction between this regulatory pattern and how attention is directed. When attention is divided across multiple concerns, or when it remains focused on tasks without clear completion, the signals associated with effort may become more prominent. The brain integrates these signals with physical input, shaping the overall experience of fatigue. This does not imply that fatigue is purely a mental phenomenon. It reflects the integration of multiple sources of information, all of which contribute to how the body decides when to continue and when to reduce output. The presence or absence of clear purpose and boundaries influences this decision, guiding the allocation of energy in ways that are consistent with long-term stability. When these elements are considered together, the experience of wearing out can be understood as part of a system that prioritizes adaptability. The body is not designed to expend all available energy in every situation. It is designed to manage resources across time, adjusting output based on both current conditions and anticipated needs. When effort is clearly defined and bounded, this management can feel efficient and directed. When it is not, the same system may produce sensations that encourage caution, even when physical capacity remains. In this way, fatigue becomes a signal not only of what has been done, but of how the body is preparing for what might come next. And within that signal, the sense of limitation may arise not from a lack of ability, but from the body's ongoing effort to preserve balance in the face of uncertainty. The way a day unfolds has a quiet influence on how the body uses and restores energy. In biological terms, the human body follows internal cycles that repeat over roughly 24 hours, often referred to as circadian rhythms. These rhythms help regulate sleep, alertness, hormone release, and many aspects of metabolism. They are influenced by external cues such as light and darkness, temperature, and patterns of activity. When these cues are consistent, the body can organize its processes in a coordinated way, preparing for periods of activity and allowing for gradual transitions into rest. This coordination supports a steady flow of energy, where different systems align in timing and function. The result is not an absence of fatigue, but a pattern in which fatigue appears and resolves in a predictable rhythm. In many earlier human contexts, daily life was more closely linked to these environmental cycles. Light levels changed gradually, guiding the transition between activity and rest. Movement tended to follow the availability of daylight, and tasks were often structured around natural conditions rather than fixed schedules. While it is not possible to describe these patterns in precise detail across all settings, there is broad agreement in anthropology and chronobiology that human physiology evolved in close relationship with such cycles. The body's internal timing systems reflect this relationship, responding to consistent cues that help synchronize different processes. When these cues are present, the body does not need to rely as heavily on internal signaling to regulate energy, because the external environment provides a framework for when to be active and when to recover. When the structure of the day becomes more fragmented, this alignment can shift. Activity may occur at varying times, and periods of rest may not correspond as closely with the body's internal signals. Light exposure can extend into times that would otherwise be associated with reduced activity, and the transition between day and night may become less distinct. These changes do not alter the fundamental mechanisms of circadian rhythms, but they can influence how these mechanisms are expressed. The body continues to follow its internal cycles, yet the signals it receives from the environment may not always match those cycles. As a result, the coordination between systems may become less precise, and the experience of energy can feel more variable. Fatigue may appear at times that seem inconsistent, and recovery may not feel as complete, even when rest is present. Another element of daily rhythm is how activity is distributed across time. In a continuous pattern, movement and rest are interwoven, with changes in intensity rather than clear separations. This allows the body to adjust gradually, maintaining engagement at different levels without sharp transitions. In a more fragmented pattern, the day may be divided into distinct segments, with periods of activity separated by intervals of stillness. While this structure can be practical, it introduces clearer boundaries between states. Each transition requires the body to adjust more quickly, and these repeated adjustments can influence how energy is perceived. Even if the total amount of activity is not excessive, the pattern of segmentation can create a sense of repeated starting and stopping, which may feel more demanding than a steady flow. Looking at the broader human context, the relationship between internal rhythms and external structure has always been important. The body's timing systems are designed to anticipate change, preparing for activity before it begins and supporting recovery as conditions shift. When external cues are stable, this anticipation can function smoothly, reducing the need for abrupt regulation. When cues are less consistent, the body may rely more on internal feedback to maintain balance. This can lead to stronger or more frequent signals of fatigue, as the system works to adjust to varying conditions. The experience of wearing out, in this sense, is not only about how much energy is used, but about how well the timing of that use aligns with the body's internal rhythms. When alignment is present, energy can feel steady and sustainable. When it is less consistent, the same processes may feel less predictable, and fatigue may become a more prominent part of the experience. And within this shifting rhythm, the question of why the body seems to tire more quickly begins to connect not only to movement or effort, but to the structure of time itself and how the body moves through it. When the day is divided into many separate segments, the body is asked to move between different states more often, and each transition carries a cost that is not always visible. The body does not instantly change from rest to activity, or from activity to rest. Each shift requires adjustments in heart rate, breathing, circulation, and neural signaling. When these transitions happen occasionally and gradually, the adjustments can unfold smoothly. When they occur repeatedly and without a clear rhythm, the body may need to reorganize itself more frequently, and this repeated reorganization can influence how effort is felt. The sensation of fatigue in this context is not only related to the amount of work performed, but to the number of times the body must begin again. From a physiological perspective, starting an activity often requires a brief increase in demand that is higher than what is needed to sustain that activity once it is underway. This is sometimes described as an initial adjustment phase, where the body activates systems to meet the new level of effort. Blood vessels expand, oxygen delivery increases, and muscle fibers are recruited to support movement. After this phase, the body may settle into a more efficient state where energy use becomes steadier. When activity is continuous, this adjustment happens once and is followed by a period of relative stability. When activity is fragmented into shorter segments, the adjustment phase may be repeated many times throughout the day. Each repetition adds to the overall sense of effort, even if the individual tasks are not demanding. Over time, this pattern can create the impression that energy is being used more quickly, because the body rarely remains in the more efficient steady state for long. This effect becomes more noticeable when considering how the nervous system interprets these repeated transitions. The brain monitors changes in effort and uses them to guide behavior, often responding more strongly to changes than to stable conditions. A sudden increase in demand is more likely to generate a clear signal than a sustained moderate level of activity. When the day contains many small increases in effort, the nervous system may respond to each one, producing a series of signals that are experienced as repeated moments of strain. Even if each moment is brief, their accumulation can influence the overall perception of fatigue. In contrast, a continuous pattern of activity provides fewer abrupt changes, and the signals associated with effort may feel less pronounced, even when the total energy expenditure is similar. Another aspect of fragmentation is how it affects recovery within the day. In a continuous pattern, small reductions in intensity can allow partial recovery to occur without a complete stop. These micro-adjustments help maintain balance between effort and restoration, reducing the need for longer periods of rest. In a fragmented pattern, recovery may be more clearly separated from activity, occurring during distinct breaks rather than being integrated into movement. While these breaks can provide rest, they also reinforce the separation between states. When activity resumes, the body must again transition from a lower level of engagement to a higher one, repeating the adjustment process. This cycle can influence how recovery is experienced, making it feel less connected to activity and more dependent on distinct periods of rest. Looking across the broader human context, the distribution of activity within the day has always played a role in how energy is managed. While patterns varied depending on environment and resources, there is consistent evidence that movement was often spread across time rather than confined to isolated periods. This distribution allowed the body to operate within a range where transitions were gradual and systems remained engaged. When the structure of the day changes, introducing more frequent and abrupt transitions, the body continues to apply the same regulatory principles, but the conditions in which those principles operate are different. The result is a pattern of energy use that may feel less stable, with fatigue appearing in ways that reflect the repeated need to adjust rather than a simple depletion of resources. When these elements are considered together, the fragmentation of the day emerges as a factor that shapes how effort is organized and perceived. It does not reduce the body's capacity, but it changes the pathway through which that capacity is expressed. The experience of wearing out becomes linked not only to how much is done, but to how often the body must shift between states, each shift carrying its own subtle demand. And within these repeated beginnings, the sense of fatigue may grow, not because the body cannot sustain activity, but because it is rarely allowed to remain within a steady flow where effort can settle into its most balanced form. When a day is shaped by many separate segments, something subtle begins to change in how time itself is experienced within the body. Instead of flowing as a continuous progression, time becomes divided into smaller units, each with its own beginning and end. The body responds to these divisions not as abstract ideas, but as repeated signals that require preparation and adjustment. Each new segment invites a small reset, where systems must re-engage, reorient, and establish a new balance. Over the course of a day, these resets accumulate, and the accumulation can influence how energy is felt, even when the total demands are not extreme. The body is not only working within each segment, it is also responding to the boundaries between them. From a physiological perspective, these boundaries are moments of change. Heart rate may shift, breathing patterns adjust, and attention moves from one focus to another. The nervous system interprets each change and coordinates the body's response. When such changes are infrequent and follow a gradual pattern, the system can maintain a sense of continuity. When they are frequent and abrupt, the system may spend more time adjusting than stabilizing. This repeated adjustment does not always register as effort in a direct way, but it can contribute to a background sense of fatigue that is difficult to attribute to any single activity. The body is engaged in many small reorganizations, each one subtle, yet together they form a pattern that shapes the overall experience of energy. Another effect of fragmentation is how it alters the relationship between effort and recovery across time. In a continuous pattern, recovery is distributed, occurring in small increments as activity varies. This allows the body to maintain a dynamic balance, where no single period carries the full weight of restoration. In a segmented pattern, recovery may be expected to occur during specific intervals that are set apart from activity. These intervals can provide rest, yet they may also concentrate the responsibility for recovery into distinct periods. When the body does not fully restore within those periods, fatigue may carry over into the next segment, creating a sense that energy is not returning as expected. This carryover can influence how subsequent activity is experienced, making each new beginning feel slightly more demanding than the last. Over time, the day may take on a rhythm in which effort accumulates across segments, rather than being balanced within a continuous flow. The perception of time itself also plays a role in how fatigue is interpreted. When activity is continuous, attention often follows the movement, and the passage of time may feel more fluid. In such conditions, the body can remain engaged without constantly reassessing its state. In a fragmented pattern, attention may shift more frequently, marking the boundaries between segments and bringing awareness to the effort required to begin each new task. This repeated awareness can amplify the perception of fatigue, as the body is continually reminded of the effort involved in transitioning. The sensation of tiredness becomes linked not only to physical demand, but to the repeated recognition of that demand at each boundary. Looking across the broader human context, the way time is structured has always influenced how the body organizes energy. While past patterns varied, there is strong evidence that activity was often shaped by environmental cues that created a more gradual progression through the day. Light changed slowly, Tasks unfolded in response to conditions, and the boundaries between activities were less sharply defined. The body's systems developed within this kind of temporal landscape, where change was present but not abrupt, and where continuity supported both function and recovery. When the structure of time becomes more segmented, the body continues to operate according to the same principles, but the conditions in which those principles are expressed are different. The experience of fatigue may then reflect this difference, emerging not only from the amount of work performed, but from the way that work is divided across time. When these elements are considered together, the fragmented day reveals itself as more than a schedule. It becomes a pattern that shapes how the body moves, how it recovers, and how it perceives effort. The repeated beginnings, the defined endings, and the transitions between them create a rhythm that is distinct from a continuous flow. Within that rhythm, the sense of wearing out may arise not from a single source, but from the accumulation of many small shifts, each one requiring the body to adjust once again. And in that accumulation, fatigue may come to reflect the structure of time as much as the demands placed within it. Muscles do not simply become stronger or weaker. They adapt to the patterns they repeat, and over time those patterns shape not only how force is produced, but how effort is felt. This is one reason the human body can seem less durable than it once was, even when its basic biological structure remains the same. The issue is not that muscle has forgotten how to contract. It is that muscle responds to signals, and the signals that guide it have changed. In physiology, muscle tissue is highly responsive to use. Fibers adjust their metabolic properties, their coordination with nerves, and their tolerance for repeated load according to the demands placed on them. When movement is frequent, varied, and spread across the day, muscles are trained in a broad sense. They are not only being strengthened, they are being taught when to engage, how long to stay active, and how to share work with other tissues. This kind of adaptation supports endurance because it creates a body that is ready for many low-level demands rather than one narrow form of effort. Looking across the longer human story, the body developed under conditions where movement was rarely isolated into a single category. Walking, carrying, reaching, balancing, crouching, rising, and adjusting to surfaces were woven into life in changing combinations. Even without making rigid claims about every prehistoric routine, it is widely accepted that human bodies were shaped in environments that required regular, whole-body coordination. Under such conditions, muscles were not asked to perform one repeated motion in a highly controlled setting. They were asked to respond to variation. This matters because muscles function best when they are part of a coordinated system, not when they are used as separate parts only during brief and predictable moments. Another important point is that muscle does not work alone. It depends on the nervous system to recruit fibers in the right sequence and intensity. When movement patterns become narrow or repetitive, the nervous system may rely on the same pathways again and again. Over time, this can make certain muscles more dominant and others less involved, even if all of them remain present. The result is not necessarily obvious weakness, but a less balanced distribution of effort. Some regions begin to carry more of the work, while others contribute less than they could. This unevenness can change how fatigue appears. The body may feel tired sooner, not because it lacks muscle in a general sense, but because the same tissues are being asked to do the same work too often, with fewer opportunities for variation or support. The sensation of effort is also shaped by familiarity. Muscles that are regularly exposed to small changes in angle, load, and pace become more adaptable. They can respond without treating each new movement as a fresh demand. But when movement is less varied, even moderate tasks may feel unexpectedly heavy because the body must solve them with a narrower set of learned patterns. In that sense, the problem is not only reduced use, it is reduced range of use. A muscle system trained by repetition without diversity may function well inside a limited zone, yet feel strained when asked to move beyond it. This helps explain why ordinary actions can sometimes feel more tiring than their actual force would suggest. They are not large efforts, but they may arrive outside the patterns the body has been practicing. There is also a deeper evolutionary layer beneath this. Human muscles were shaped not only for strength, but for reliability across time. They supported a body that needed to keep moving through uncertain landscapes, changing temperatures, and irregular demands. That kind of history favored responsiveness, coordination, and endurance more than constant maximum output. When the signals reaching muscle no longer resemble that older pattern, adaptation continues, but it moves in a different direction. The body remains plastic. It learns what it repeats. If what it repeats is narrower, more fixed, and less varied, then muscle begins to specialize around those conditions. And once that happens, fatigue may begin to reflect not the loss of muscle itself, but the loss of the wider language of movement that muscle was originally shaped to understand. Muscle adaptation is often described in terms of size or strength, but a quieter part of adaptation lies in timing. Muscles must know not only how much force to produce, but when to produce it, how long to hold it, and when to release it so that another part of the body can take over. This timing depends on repeated interaction between muscles, joints, and the nervous system. When the pattern of movement is broad and varied, timing becomes more flexible. Different muscles learn to join and leave the task in shifting sequences, and effort is spread across the body in a way that reduces local strain. When the pattern is narrower, timing can become more rigid. The same muscles may begin to activate in the same order under the same conditions, and the body may lose some of its ability to redistribute work smoothly. Fatigue in this case is not only about force, it is also about coordination becoming less adaptable. This becomes clearer when considering how the body deals with ordinary transitions. Rising, turning, reaching, stepping over a slight obstacle, or changing pace while walking, all require the body to coordinate many small shifts in muscle activity. No single muscle solves these actions alone. The task is shared. In a body accustomed to varied movement, these transitions often happen with little sensation of effort because the system has many available pathways. If one area contributes slightly less, another can assist. If the angle changes, the pattern adjusts. But when daily movement becomes more repetitive and less diverse, the number of available pathways may narrow. The body still completes the task, yet it may do so with a more limited set of solutions. Over time, this can make movement feel heavier, not because the task is objectively large, but because the system has fewer coordinated options for carrying it out. The role of the nervous system is central here. Muscles receive instructions through motor units, and the brain continuously regulates how many fibers to recruit, in what order, and with what intensity. In well-distributed movement, this recruitment can vary from moment to moment, giving certain fibers brief relief while others take over. This kind of alternation supports endurance. It allows muscles to keep functioning without any one portion being overused too quickly. When movement patterns become fixed, recruitment may become more uniform and predictable. The same fibers are called on in the same way, and the opportunities for subtle rotation of effort are reduced. The person may not notice this directly, but the body does. The result can be an earlier sense of tiredness in specific regions, even when overall exertion remains modest. Looking across the longer human background, this makes biological sense. Human movement developed in conditions where terrain, posture, pace, and task changed often. The body had to stay responsive, not only strong. It had to shift from walking to carrying, from balance to bending, from stillness to motion, all within environments that were rarely identical from one hour to the next. Under those conditions, muscles were constantly receiving varied signals. They learned not only endurance but adaptability in timing and recruitment. That wider adaptability remains part of human physiology, yet it depends on use. It is maintained through repeated exposure to variation, not preserved automatically in the absence of it. Another important point is that inefficient timing can create the feeling of weakness even when strength is still present. A muscle group may be capable of producing enough force, but if it activates too early, holds tension too long, or fails to release at the right moment, the movement becomes less economical. Energy is spent where it does not need to be, and the body interprets that extra cost as effort. This is one reason fatigue can appear without obvious overexertion. The issue may not be lack of power, but a narrowing of the body's timing strategies. When viewed this way, muscle adaptation is not only about what muscles can do in isolation, it is about how many ways they remember how to work together. If those remembered patterns become fewer, the body may still move, but it will do so with less ease and less freedom to spread effort across time. And in that narrowing, the feeling of wearing out may begin to reflect a loss of coordination range rather than a simple loss of muscular ability. When patterns of movement become narrower, the body does not stop adapting. It continues to learn, but it learns within the limits of what it repeats. Over time, this creates a system that is efficient inside a smaller range, yet less prepared for variation. The muscles still respond, the joints still move, and the nervous system still coordinates these actions, but the space of possible responses becomes more defined. This definition can be useful in stable conditions, where the same actions are required again and again. However, it can also reduce the body's ability to distribute effort when conditions change, even slightly. In this sense, the body becomes more specialized, not necessarily weaker, but less flexible in how it organizes movement across time. This specialization influences how fatigue is experienced. When a task falls within the familiar range, it may feel manageable because the body can rely on well-established patterns. When a task moves outside that range, even if it is not objectively demanding, the body may treat it as unfamiliar. Muscles may activate less efficiently, coordination may require more attention, and the nervous system may respond with stronger signals to regulate effort. These signals are interpreted as fatigue even though the underlying capacity has not been fully used. The feeling of effort, in this case, reflects the distance between what the body expects and what it is being asked to do. The larger that distance, the more pronounced the sensation may become. Another aspect of this process is how recovery interacts with learned patterns. When movement is varied, recovery can be distributed across different tissues and systems. As one group of muscles reduces its activity, another may take on more of the work, allowing the first to restore itself without a complete stop. This rotation supports endurance by spreading the load across time. When movement is more fixed, the same tissues may be used repeatedly without as much opportunity for redistribution. Recovery still occurs, but it may require clearer breaks rather than being integrated into ongoing activity. This can make fatigue feel more concentrated, as the body relies on distinct periods of rest instead of continuous adjustment. The difference is not in whether recovery happens, but in how it is organized. Looking across the broader human context, the capacity for varied movement appears to have been a consistent feature of how the body functioned in changing environments. Terrain shifted, tasks differed, and the body adapted in real time. This adaptability is reflected in the structure of joints, the responsiveness of muscles, and the flexibility of neural control. These features support a system that can move through a wide range of conditions without relying on a single pattern. While it is not possible to define the exact movements of earlier populations in detail, the general principle of variability is supported by both anatomical evidence and the demands of diverse environments. The body was not designed for one narrow set of actions, but for the ability to adjust across many. When this variability is reduced, the system continues to operate, but it does so within a more limited framework. Movements may become more predictable, coordination may rely on fewer pathways, and the distribution of effort may become less balanced. Over time, this can influence not only how the body performs, but how it feels while performing. Fatigue may appear as a signal that the system is reaching the limits of its current patterns, even if those patterns represent only a portion of the body's full capacity. This perspective shifts the meaning of wearing out. It suggests that the sensation may not always indicate a reduction in strength or endurance, but a narrowing of the ways in which those qualities can be expressed. When the body has fewer options for organizing movement, each demand may draw more heavily on the same pathways, and the signals associated with those pathways may become more prominent. The body is still capable, but its capacity is being used in a more concentrated way, and within that concentration, the feeling of fatigue may arise not because the body cannot continue, but because it is working within a smaller set of learned responses, each one carrying a greater share of the load. The experience of pain is often closely linked to the experience of fatigue, yet it follows its own logic within the body. Pain is not simply a direct measure of damage, it is a signal created by the nervous system, influenced by sensory input, past experience, and the context in which the body is operating. In this way, pain can persist even when there is no immediate threat, or it can diminish when the body interprets a situation as stable. This variability is well recognized in medical and physiological research, where pain is understood as part of a protective system designed to guide behavior, rather than to report exact conditions. When this system operates within clear boundaries, pain tends to rise and fall in relation to identifiable events. When boundaries are less defined, the signal may become more persistent, shaping how effort is perceived over time. In earlier human contexts, many sources of physical strain were connected to tasks that had clear beginnings and endings. Movement across a landscape, lifting, carrying, or interacting with the environment all involved effort that was tied to a specific purpose. When the task ended, the body shifted away from that demand, and the signals associated with strain could resolve within a context that supported recovery. While it is not possible to assume that pain was always brief or simple, the structure of activity often provided a framework within which pain could be interpreted. The body was responding to conditions that changed in visible ways, and these changes influenced how long a signal remained relevant. The nervous system, receiving feedback from both the body and the environment, adjusted its output accordingly. When the structure of activity becomes less defined, the context for interpreting pain can change. Repetitive or sustained demands without clear resolution may lead the body to maintain a protective signal for longer periods. This does not mean that the body is misinterpreting its state. It reflects a cautious approach, where the system continues to signal until conditions are clearly safe. In such cases, pain can become part of the background experience, influencing how movement is approached and how effort is distributed. The presence of ongoing discomfort can alter coordination, leading to changes in posture or movement patterns that aim to reduce strain. These adjustments can be useful in the short term, yet they may also shift load to other areas, contributing to a more complex pattern of fatigue. Another important aspect is how pain interacts with anticipation. The brain does not wait for a signal to appear before adjusting behavior. It can anticipate discomfort based on previous experience, and this anticipation can influence how muscles are activated. When a movement is expected to produce pain, the body may limit its range or reduce its force output in advance. This protective response can prevent further strain, but it can also change how effort is perceived. Movements may feel more difficult, not only because of physical conditions, but because the system is operating within a narrower range of action. Over time, this interaction between anticipation and sensation can reinforce patterns in which both pain and fatigue appear more readily, even in the absence of increasing demand. Looking across the broader human context, the relationship between pain, movement, and recovery has always been shaped by the environment. The body developed in conditions where signals of discomfort had to be balanced with the need to continue functioning. Complete avoidance of pain was not always possible, and the system evolved to manage it in a way that supported survival. This involved not only detecting potential harm, but also adjusting behavior to maintain function despite it. The flexibility of this system is evident in how pain can change depending on context, attention, and activity. When conditions provide clear feedback, the system can regulate itself more precisely. When conditions are less defined, the same system may produce signals that persist as a way of maintaining caution. When these elements are considered together, pain becomes part of a broader process that influences how the body uses energy. It shapes movement, alters coordination, and interacts with the perception of effort. The sensation of wearing out may therefore include not only the direct experience of fatigue, but also the ongoing presence of signals that guide behavior over longer periods. And within this interaction, the body's response reflects not a simple decline, but a complex system that continues to adapt, using both fatigue and pain to navigate conditions that do not always provide clear boundaries or resolution. Pain becomes more influential when it is no longer tied to a single event that clearly ends. In such cases, the body is not only responding to a present signal, it is living inside a condition of continued caution. From a physiological point of view, this makes sense. The nervous system is designed to protect the body by adjusting behavior when uncertainty remains. If a signal of discomfort continues, or if movement repeatedly produces a similar warning, the system may begin to treat that area or pattern of action as something that requires ongoing supervision. This does not mean pain is imaginary, and it does not mean the body is exaggerating. It means that pain is part of regulation, and regulation tends to persist when resolution is incomplete or unclear. Under these conditions, fatigue and pain begin to reinforce one another in quiet ways. One reason for this lies in how pain changes movement before a person is fully aware of it. small adjustments begin to appear. A step becomes shorter, a shoulder lifts slightly, the trunk becomes more guarded, or a joint moves through a smaller range. These responses are often protective. They reduce strain on one area, at least for the moment, but the body rarely removes effort without relocating it. When one region contributes less, another often contributes more. This redistribution can be useful in the short term, yet if it continues over time, it may create a pattern in which effort becomes less balanced. Certain muscles remain active longer than they otherwise would. Posture becomes more fixed, and ordinary actions begin to carry a quiet extra cost. The person may describe this as tiredness, heaviness, or the feeling that the body wears down too quickly. In that sense, fatigue is not separate from pain. It is often part of the same adaptive response. The nervous system also learns from repetition. When a specific movement, posture, or sequence has been associated with discomfort many times, the body may begin to prepare for that discomfort before it fully arrives. Research in pain science shows that expectation and prior experience can influence the intensity and timing of pain-related responses. This does not mean expectation creates pain out of nothing. It means the system becomes more efficient at protection. Muscles may tense earlier, movement may become more cautious, and effort may feel larger than the mechanical demand alone would justify. Over time, this can narrow the body's available range of motion and coordination. Actions that were once fluid may begin to feel negotiated, as if the body is checking each step before fully committing to it. That checking has a metabolic and perceptual cost. It makes movement feel less automatic and more effortful. Looking across the longer human background, pain likely functioned most clearly when it was embedded in visible conditions. A strain, a wound, a demanding journey, or a difficult terrain gave the signal a clear setting. The body still had to adapt, but the environment often provided information about why caution was needed and when it might ease. Human physiology developed in relationship with such conditions, where discomfort was part of physical life but often linked to understandable demands. In more ambiguous situations, the same protective system remains active, yet the context that helps the body interpret and resolve the signal may be less direct. The result is not necessarily stronger pain, but pain that remains more open-ended, with fewer cues telling the body when it is safe to relax its guard. This matters for the central question of the video because a body under ongoing protective adjustment does not spend energy in a neutral way. It spends energy while bracing, compensating, anticipating, and reorganizing movement. Even low-level discomfort can therefore influence the entire economy of effort. A person may not be using great force, yet still feel worn down because the body is carrying a continuous regulatory task in the background. Pain, in this sense, is not just a signal about one place. It can become a condition that changes how the whole system distributes work. When viewed this way, lingering pain helps explain why the human body may seem to wear out faster. Not because pain always means serious damage, and not because discomfort alone determines endurance, but because prolonged protection changes how movement is organized across time. And once movement is reorganized around caution, fatigue can begin to accumulate from that caution itself, quietly turning even ordinary effort into something heavier than it first appears. When pain remains present without a clear resolution, it gradually becomes part of how the body defines normal movement. What begins as a temporary adjustment can settle into a lasting pattern, not because the body has chosen it deliberately, but because it has learned to operate within those conditions. The nervous system, shaped by repetition, begins to treat the altered pattern as the safest available option. This does not require conscious awareness. It is a form of adaptation that happens quietly, guided by signals that prioritize stability over range. As a result, movement may become more cautious, more contained, and less varied, even in the absence of ongoing injury. The body is not simply reacting to pain, it is reorganizing itself around the expectation that pain could return. This reorganization affects how energy is used across the entire system. When movement is more guarded, muscles may remain active longer than necessary, maintaining tension to protect certain areas. This sustained activation requires energy, even if it does not produce visible effort. At the same time, other muscles may contribute less, either because they are being avoided or because coordination has shifted. The overall effect is a redistribution of work that can feel inefficient. Tasks that once required minimal attention may begin to demand more focus, and the sense of effort may increase even when the mechanical load is unchanged. Fatigue, in this context, reflects the added cost of maintaining a protective state, where the body is constantly balancing between movement and caution. Another important element is how this pattern influences the timing of recovery. When movement is organized around protection, the opportunities for natural variation may decrease. The body may rely on a narrower set of positions and actions, limiting the rotation of effort that supports gradual recovery. Instead of allowing different tissues to share the load over time, the system may concentrate activity in specific areas while keeping others relatively inactive. This concentration can make recovery feel less integrated, as the same regions are repeatedly engaged without sufficient variation to distribute strain. The sensation of fatigue may then persist, not because recovery is absent, but because it is not occurring in a way that aligns with how the body typically balances effort. Over time, the interaction between pain and movement can also influence perception. The body does not separate physical sensation from its interpretation. Signals of discomfort are integrated with expectations, attention, and prior experience, shaping how they are felt and how they guide behavior. When pain has been present for an extended period, the system may become more sensitive to related signals, responding more quickly to changes in movement or load. This sensitivity can be protective, helping to prevent further strain, but it can also make ordinary variations feel more significant. The result is a heightened awareness of effort, where small demands are more likely to be experienced as tiring. This does not indicate that the body is failing. It reflects a system that is operating with increased caution, using available information to manage uncertainty. Looking across the broader human context, the body's capacity to adapt to pain has always been essential. In environments where physical challenges were common, the ability to adjust movement and continue functioning despite discomfort would have supported survival. This adaptability remains part of human physiology, yet it depends on the context in which it operates. When signals of discomfort are linked to clear conditions and changes in the environment, the system can adjust and readjust as those conditions evolve. When signals persist without clear boundaries, the adjustments may become more stable, shaping movement over longer periods. This stability can be useful, but it can also reduce flexibility, influencing how the body responds to new demands. When these elements are considered together, the persistence of pain reveals itself as more than a localized issue. It becomes part of a broader pattern that affects how the body organizes effort, distributes energy, and interprets movement. The feeling of wearing out more quickly may therefore include the cumulative effect of these adjustments, where energy is used not only for action, but for maintaining a system of protection. And within that system, fatigue may arise not from a lack of strength, but from the ongoing cost of carrying a pattern that was never meant to remain unchanged for too long. Aging is often imagined as a simple decline, a slow and steady loss built into the body from the beginning. But from a biological perspective, aging is better understood as the gradual accumulation of change across many systems at once. Cells repair themselves less efficiently, tissues recover more slowly, and the coordination between organs becomes less flexible over time. None of these processes begins at a single moment, and none of them moves at exactly the same pace in every person. What matters here is not the idea that aging suddenly makes the body weak, but that it changes how the body manages effort, repair, and adaptation across the years. This matters for the question of wearing out, because a body that can still function well may nevertheless begin to feel the cost of ordinary demands more quickly than before. One reason is that recovery depends on reserve. When the body is young, many systems can absorb stress and return to balance with relatively little strain. Muscles repair after use, connective tissues respond to loading, sleep restores energy more effectively, and hormonal signals help coordinate these processes in a resilient way. With age, these same systems still operate, but often with less speed and less flexibility. This does not mean the body stops adapting. It means adaptation may require more time, more consistency, and more favorable conditions. A task that once left little trace may now remain in the body longer, as stiffness, soreness, or fatigue. The body has not become useless. It has become less forgiving of imbalance. Looking across the broader human story, aging likely unfolded within lives that remained closely tied to movement, natural light, and environmental variation. The exact details differ across populations and cannot be reconstructed in full, yet it is widely accepted that human physiology developed under conditions where the body continued to receive regular physical signals across the lifespan. Walking, standing, carrying, adjusting to terrain, and responding to weather were not separate health practices. They were part of life itself. In such conditions, the aging body was still operating inside a world that continually engaged the systems responsible for circulation, balance, muscle use, and timing. That engagement did not stop aging, but it may have supported a steadier relationship between decline and function, because the body remained in dialogue with the kinds of demands it had long evolved to meet. Another important factor is that aging affects not only strength, but the precision of regulation. The body depends on countless small adjustments to manage temperature, blood sugar, inflammation, and tissue repair. Over time, these adjustments may become less finely tuned. The result is often not dramatic failure, but a reduced ability to recover smoothly from disruption. A poor night of sleep, a long period of stillness, or a repeated strain may leave a deeper mark than before. The body may feel more easily thrown off balance, and more time may be needed to return to equilibrium. This helps explain why wearing out with age can feel different from simple tiredness. It is not only that effort is harder, it is that the return from effort is slower, and the trace of each demand can remain longer in the body. There is also the question of boundaries. In a body that recovers more slowly, the line between temporary fatigue and accumulated wear becomes more important. If effort continues without enough variation, if pain remains unresolved, or if recovery signals are weak or inconsistent, the effects may build quietly across time. Aging does not create this pattern on its own, but it can make the body more sensitive to it. A narrower margin for recovery means that habits of movement, rest, and daily rhythm may matter more, not because aging is a mistake, but because the body now depends more heavily on favorable timing and distribution of effort. When these elements are considered together, aging appears not as a single force that suddenly reduces the body, but as a long change in how the body absorbs and answers the world. The same body remains, yet its reserve becomes more limited, its recovery more gradual, and its tolerance for disruption less broad. In that sense, the feeling of wearing out faster with age may reflect not only the passing of time, but the growing importance of balance in a body that can still endure, though it can no longer afford to waste as much of its strength on disorder as it once did. As the body moves through time, another subtle shift takes place in how signals are interpreted. The same physical demand can begin to feel different, not only because tissues have changed, but because the system that reads those signals has become more sensitive to imbalance. Sensitivity, in this sense, is not simply increased pain or discomfort. It is a broader tendency for the body to respond more quickly to deviations from its preferred state. Small changes in posture, slight variations in movement, or modest disruptions in rhythm may be noticed earlier and held for longer. This can influence how fatigue is experienced, as the body becomes more attentive to the cost of maintaining stability. Effort is not only performed, it is monitored more closely, and that monitoring itself becomes part of the experience. From a physiological perspective, this shift can be understood through changes in regulation. Systems that control inflammation, tissue repair, and energy balance remain active throughout life, but their responses may become less precise over time. Instead of resolving quickly, certain signals may persist at low levels, creating a background condition that influences how new demands are handled. This does not necessarily lead to immediate limitation, but it can alter the starting point from which effort begins. The body is no longer moving from a fully neutral baseline. It is moving from a state that may already contain traces of previous activity. These traces are not always strong enough to be noticed directly, yet they can affect how new effort is distributed and how quickly fatigue appears. Looking at the broader human context, the aging body likely remained engaged with its environment in ways that supported ongoing adjustment. Movement did not disappear, and the relationship between activity and rest continued to be shaped by external conditions. While the details cannot be known with certainty, the general pattern of continued engagement is supported by the structure of the human body itself, which retains its capacity for movement and adaptation across the lifespan. This suggests that aging was not a process of withdrawal from activity, but a change in how activity was managed. The body may have relied more on variation, pacing, and distribution of effort, rather than on sustained intensity. These strategies align with the idea that sensitivity increases with time, requiring a more careful balance between demand and recovery. Another element of this process is the role of accumulation. Over many years, the body gathers the effects of countless small events. Each movement, each period of rest, each minor strain or recovery contributes to a larger pattern. Most of these events are resolved without lasting impact, but some leave subtle marks that influence future responses. This accumulation does not always produce visible changes, yet it shapes how the body reacts to new conditions. A movement that was once neutral may now interact with existing patterns, creating a slightly different experience. Fatigue, in this context, reflects not only the present demand, but the history that the body carries forward. It is influenced by how past and present interact within the same system. There is also a shift in how recovery is distributed across time. When the body recovers quickly, it can absorb irregular patterns without much difficulty. As recovery slows, the timing of rest becomes more significant. Recovery may need to occur more consistently, rather than being concentrated into fewer, larger intervals. When this consistency is not present, the body may carry unresolved demands from one period into the next. This carryover can create a sense of ongoing effort, where fatigue does not fully resolve before new activity begins. The experience of wearing out, then, is not only about how much is done in a single moment, but about how effectively recovery is integrated across the flow of time. When these elements are considered together, aging appears as a process that increases the importance of balance within the body's systems. Sensitivity to change becomes greater, accumulation plays a larger role, and recovery requires more careful distribution. The body remains capable of adapting, but it does so within narrower margins. Fatigue, in this setting, becomes a signal that reflects these changing conditions. It points not only to the effort being made, but to how that effort fits within a system that is carrying its past forward while continuing to respond to the present. And within that ongoing adjustment, the feeling of wearing out may arise as a natural expression of a body that is still functioning, yet doing so with a growing awareness of the cost of maintaining its balance. Over time, the body does not simply slow down, it becomes more dependent on how well its different systems remain coordinated. In earlier stages of life, there is often enough flexibility for the body to compensate when one part falls slightly out of rhythm. Muscles may take on extra work, circulation may adjust quickly, and recovery processes may correct small imbalances without much effort. As aging progresses, this capacity for compensation remains, but it may require more precise conditions to function smoothly. The margin for error becomes narrower, and the body relies more heavily on alignment between movement, rest, and internal timing. When that alignment is present, the body can still operate with stability. When it is not, the effects of imbalance may appear more quickly, often in the form of fatigue that seems disproportionate to the immediate demand. This change can be understood through the idea of coordination across systems. Movement depends on the integration of muscles, joints, the nervous system, and metabolic processes. Recovery depends on sleep, circulation, and the regulation of internal chemistry. These systems are not separate. They operate together, and their effectiveness depends on how well they synchronize. With age, the synchronization itself may become more sensitive to disruption. Small mismatches in timing, such as irregular patterns of activity or inconsistent rest, may have a larger impact than they once did. The body is still capable of adjusting, but the adjustment may take longer or require more consistent input. As a result, fatigue may appear not only because of what is being done, but because the conditions needed for smooth coordination are not fully present. Looking across the broader human context, this increased reliance on coordination may have been balanced by environments that naturally supported rhythm. Light, temperature, and patterns of movement provided ongoing cues that helped align internal processes. While the exact details cannot be fully known, it is widely accepted that human physiology developed in settings where external conditions contributed to the organization of daily life. These conditions may have helped maintain a certain level of synchronization across systems, even as the body aged. When such cues are less consistent, the body must rely more on internal regulation to maintain balance. This reliance can increase the prominence of fatigue as a signal, guiding behavior in the absence of clear external structure. Another important factor is how the body manages transitions over longer periods. In a system with greater reserve, transitions between activity and rest can be absorbed with relatively little impact. In a system with reduced reserve, each transition may carry more weight. Starting an activity, maintaining it, and then recovering from it all become parts of a process that must be carefully balanced. If one part of this process is out of alignment, the effects may extend into the next phase. For example, incomplete recovery may influence how the next period of activity is experienced, creating a sense of accumulated effort. This accumulation does not necessarily reflect a loss of capacity, but a change in how capacity is distributed across time. The body becomes more sensitive to the sequence of events, and fatigue may reflect the interaction between them rather than any single moment. There is also a shift in how the body responds to variability. Earlier in life, variation in activity and environment can be absorbed and even beneficial, supporting adaptability and resilience. As aging progresses, variation still plays a role, but it may need to be balanced more carefully with consistency. Too little variation can lead to rigidity, while too much can create instability. The body seeks a balance between these extremes, and fatigue can emerge when that balance is not maintained. This does not imply that the body prefers one fixed pattern. It suggests that the range within which variation can be comfortably managed may change over time, influencing how effort and recovery are experienced. When these elements are considered together, aging appears as a process that increases the importance of harmony within the body's systems. The same structures remain, but their interaction becomes more central to how the body functions. Fatigue in this context is not only a measure of effort, it is a reflection of how well different systems are working together under changing conditions. When coordination is maintained, the body can continue to perform with stability. When coordination is disrupted, the signals associated with fatigue may become more pronounced, guiding the body toward a state where balance can be restored. And within this ongoing adjustment, the feeling of wearing out may arise as part of a system that is still capable, yet increasingly attentive to the relationships that allow it to remain so. The human body has not changed as quickly as the world around it. Across generations, the environments in which people live have shifted in structure, in rhythm, and in the demands they place on movement and attention. Yet the fundamental systems that regulate energy, coordinate motion, and guide recovery have developed over much longer spans of time. These systems continue to operate according to patterns that were shaped under conditions where variation, continuity, and direct interaction with the environment were constant features of daily life. When the surrounding context changes more rapidly than these internal systems, a quiet tension can emerge. The body remains consistent in its design, while the conditions it responds to become increasingly different from those in which that design was formed. This tension does not create immediate failure, it creates subtle differences in how effort is organized and how fatigue is experienced. From a biological perspective, the body does not recognize modern or ancient conditions as separate categories. It responds to signals. These signals come from movement, from light, from temperature, and from the patterns of activity and rest that unfold across time. When these signals align in a way that supports gradual transitions and continuous engagement, the body can regulate energy with a sense of stability. When the signals are more fragmented or less predictable, the same regulatory systems must work differently to maintain balance. This can lead to adjustments that are felt as earlier or more persistent fatigue, even when the body retains its underlying capacity. The sensation of wearing out, in this context, reflects the effort required to reconcile internal expectations with external conditions. Looking across the broader human story, it is widely accepted that human physiology developed within environments that required ongoing adaptation. Movement was not isolated from the surroundings, and the timing of activity was influenced by natural cycles. While it is not possible to reconstruct every detail of these conditions, the general pattern of interaction between body and environment is supported by evidence from anthropology and physiology. The body's systems evolved to respond to this interaction, integrating multiple sources of information to guide behavior. When the nature of that interaction changes, the systems themselves do not immediately adjust. They continue to operate according to established principles, applying them to new conditions. This continuity of internal function, combined with change in external structure, is one of the key factors shaping how fatigue is experienced today. Another important element is the accumulation of small mismatches. A single difference between internal rhythm and external demand may have little effect. When such differences occur repeatedly across the day, they can begin to influence the overall pattern of energy use. The body may need to adjust more frequently, shifting between states, redistributing effort, and managing signals that arise from these changes. Each adjustment is minor, yet together they form a pattern that can alter the sense of stability. Fatigue, in this case, becomes a reflection of the cumulative work of maintaining balance under conditions that are not fully aligned with the body's original patterns. It is not a direct measure of weakness, but an indication of ongoing adaptation. There is also the question of how these adjustments are perceived. The body does not present its internal processes in a detailed way. It communicates through sensations, and fatigue is one of the primary signals it uses to guide behavior. When the effort required to maintain balance increases, even subtly, this signal may become more prominent. It may appear earlier, persist longer, or feel less clearly tied to specific actions. This can create the impression that the body is wearing out more quickly than expected. In reality, the body may be responding consistently, using the same mechanisms it has always used, but applying them to a different set of conditions. The difference lies in the context, not in the fundamental design. When these elements are considered together, the relationship between the body and its environment appears as a dynamic exchange rather than a fixed state. The body brings its history of adaptation, and the environment provides the conditions in which that adaptation is expressed. When the two are closely aligned, energy can be used and restored with a sense of continuity. When they are less aligned, the same processes may require more adjustment, and the signals associated with those adjustments may become more noticeable. And within that ongoing exchange, the feeling of wearing out may arise as a quiet reminder that the body is still operating according to patterns that extend far beyond the present moment, even as the world around it continues to change. When the body continues to follow patterns shaped over long periods, and the surrounding world continues to change, the result is not a single clear mismatch but a layered one. Each system in the body carries its own timing, its own way of responding, and its own expectations about how effort and recovery should unfold. Muscles expect variation and continuity, the nervous system expects gradual transitions and meaningful feedback, and metabolic processes expect rhythms that allow for balance over time. When these expectations are met, even imperfectly, the body can adapt with relative ease. When they are met only partially or in inconsistent ways, the body must rely more heavily on internal regulation to maintain stability. This reliance is not visible in any one movement or moment. It appears across the day, in small adjustments that accumulate without drawing attention to themselves. Over time, these adjustments begin to shape how energy is felt. One way to understand this is to consider how different forms of mismatch can overlap. A fragmented day may disrupt timing, a uniform environment may reduce variation, and unclear boundaries of effort may alter how energy is allocated. Number. Each of these factors alone may have a modest effect, but together they can influence the entire system. The body is capable of compensating for one change, sometimes even several, yet compensation itself requires energy. It involves coordination between systems, redistribution of effort, and the continuous monitoring of internal conditions. When compensation becomes a regular part of daily function, it can contribute to a persistent sense of effort, even when no single demand is particularly high. Fatigue, in this sense, becomes the expression of a system that is constantly adjusting to maintain balance. Another aspect of this layered mismatch is how it affects predictability. The body operates most efficiently when it can anticipate what is coming next. Anticipation allows systems to prepare, aligning circulation, metabolism, and neural activity before a demand fully arrives. When patterns are consistent, this preparation becomes more accurate, reducing the need for rapid adjustment. When patterns are variable or unclear, anticipation becomes less precise. The body may prepare too much or too little, and each correction requires additional coordination. This does not mean that variability is harmful, but that the type of variability matters. When changes follow a rhythm that the body can learn, they support adaptation. When they are irregular in ways that offer little pattern, they may increase the need for ongoing adjustment. The experience of fatigue can reflect this difference, appearing more readily when the body cannot settle into a predictable flow. Looking across the broader human context, it is likely that earlier environments provided forms of variability that were structured by natural cycles. Changes in light, temperature, and landscape created patterns that repeated with enough consistency to be learned. The body's systems developed in relation to these patterns, becoming skilled at responding to them over time. While it is not possible to define these conditions in precise detail, the general principle of pattern variability is supported by both ecological and physiological evidence. When the structure of variability changes, becoming less tied to natural cycles and more fragmented or abstract, the body continues to respond, but the nature of its response may shift. Fatigue may then reflect the effort required to navigate patterns that are less familiar to the system. There is also a cumulative effect that extends beyond a single day. When mismatches are repeated over many cycles, the body may begin to carry forward the adjustments it has made. These adjustments can influence baseline conditions, shaping how new demands are experienced. A system that has been compensating regularly may start from a different point, with certain pathways more active and others less engaged. This does not represent damage in a simple sense. It represents a history of adaptation that continues to influence present function. Fatigue, in this context, becomes part of that history, reflecting not only immediate conditions but the accumulated pattern of how the body has been responding. When these elements are considered together, the experience of wearing out appears as the result of multiple small differences interacting across time. The body remains capable, yet it operates within conditions that require more frequent adjustment and more careful coordination. Fatigue becomes a signal that reflects this ongoing work, not only as a response to effort, but as an indication of how much the system is doing to maintain balance. And within that signal, the body continues to express the same principles it has always followed, adapting to conditions that have changed faster than the systems designed to respond to them. When all of these layers are brought together, the question of why the human body seems to wear out more quickly begins to change its shape. It is no longer a question of whether the body has become weaker, in a simple sense. It becomes a question about how the body continues to operate according to patterns that were formed over long periods, while responding to conditions that have shifted in structure, timing, and meaning. The body has not lost its ability to endure. It has retained a system that favors balance, continuity, and gradual adjustment. When those conditions are present, even imperfectly, the body can still express that endurance in quiet, sustained ways. When they are less present, the same system may produce signals that feel like limitation, not because capacity has disappeared, but because the pathway to using that capacity has become less direct. From a biological perspective, this does not require a dramatic explanation. The body uses signals to guide behavior, and fatigue is one of its primary ways of doing so. It reflects how energy is being organized, how systems are coordinating, and how the body is responding to both immediate demands and anticipated needs. When patterns of activity, rest, environment, and purpose align, these signals tend to form a rhythm that is easier to follow. Effort builds and resolves, recovery is woven into movement, and the body maintains a sense of flow across time. When alignment is less consistent, the same signals may appear earlier, last longer, or feel less clearly connected to any one action. This can create the impression that the body is wearing out, even when it is continuing to adapt as it always has. Looking across the longer human story, it becomes clear that the body was not shaped for a single way of living, but for the ability to respond to change within a certain range. That range included variation in terrain, shifts in light and temperature, and patterns of movement that were continuous rather than sharply divided. While it is not possible to describe these conditions in full detail, the general features of variability, rhythm, and direct interaction with the environment are widely supported. The body's systems reflect this background, operating most smoothly when they can engage with conditions that allow for gradual transitions and distributed effort. When those features are reduced or reorganized, the body does not fail. It continues to function, but the signals it produces may reflect the effort required to maintain balance under different circumstances. There is also a quieter dimension to this understanding. Fatigue, when seen only as a problem to be removed, can appear as an obstacle. When seen as part of a regulatory system, it becomes a form of communication. It indicates how the body is managing its resources, how it is responding to patterns, and how it is attempting to preserve function across time. This does not make fatigue desirable, but it places it within a broader context. The body is not simply losing energy, it is organizing energy in a way that reflects both its history and its present conditions. The feeling of wearing out may therefore carry information about how these elements are interacting, rather than serving as a simple measure of decline. As this perspective settles, the question remains open rather than resolved. If the body continues to follow patterns shaped by long development, and the world continues to change around it, what would it mean for those patterns and conditions to come closer together again, even in small ways? And if fatigue is not only a sign of depletion but also a signal of how the body is navigating its environment, what might it be quietly pointing toward, beyond the immediate sense of tiredness that first brought the question into view?